A soldier clashes with an armored enemy on a chaotic battlefield. Blades lock together as war erupts around them without mercy. Spears and bodies litter the battlefield as soldiers push forward through smoke and dust, and the enemy forces begin collapsing under the sustained assault. A young soldier stares at the carnage surrounding him while comrades nearby comment on a fallen enemy who has stopped moving. Soldiers order a body moved aside without hesitation, treating death as routine, while the wounded man convulses before falling still on the ground. Walm stands among fallen enemies across the open field, gripping his blade as blood drips from its edge in the silence. A television glows in an ordinary living room, warning viewers about heatstroke on a clear, sunny day detached from the brutal war scene before. This tired man is introduced as Takakura Raizu, trudging home through a plain apartment stairwell, sighing before muttering that he still has work ahead. Raizu collapses outside his building, clutching his chest in agony, gasping desperately as he silently pleads that he does not want to die yet. His ordinary life as Takakura Raizu ends abruptly there, though he awakens somewhere new, now addressed by an unfamiliar name. Walm. Walm presses his hands together out of old habit, and a comrade teases him gently before urging everyone nearby to regroup and move onward together. Soldiers walk across a war-torn field discussing rumors that Walm alone took down 9 enemies, a feat circulating among the exhausted, weary troops. Jose questions why Walm reacts so modestly, insisting that such results deserve real pride, though Walm simply looks away without answering him. Walm explains that killing was his assigned duty as a soldier, insisting he never fought enemies just to inflate his personal combat numbers. Walm reminds himself that he now exists as a soldier, living entirely within a world where war continues raging around him without any pause. Exhausted soldiers stumble back toward camp, joking about fatigue, while Walm quietly notes he overheard everything, prompting a comrade to call him seriously unusual. Back at camp, a drunken soldier grabs Walm, laughing about hearing he defeated 9 enemies while boasting proudly of his own 15 kills. The soldier laughs about his special skill giving him an advantage, though Walm quietly admits he still cannot defeat Commander Due in combat. Commander Due greets the 2 surviving rookies, introducing Nor and Burrito, joking that skills alone feel like cheating compared to true magic. Burrito insists that his ability should be called talent rather than a cheat skill, since it comes purely from his own inner strength. Nor asks Commander Due whether his legendary warhammer truly can shatter every type of armor, eager to learn more about his skill. Commander Due unleashed his powerhouse move, a sure kill technique, while Nor and Walm watched, marveling that skills felt more real than magic. Walm stared at the corpse-strewn field, thinking one skilled fighter could change the tide of war, silently wishing he had such power. Jose teased Walm for wanting a skill of his own, noting that Walm lacked one too, yet still haggled over every coin. Jose admitted he only cared about skills if free, while Ballad asked if Jose had grown interested in magic too. Walm smiled faintly, admitting magic was a nice thing to dream about using, even if such power felt far away. Commander Due erupted in shock, shouting that Walm had admitted to dreaming, insisting they would listen until daybreak arrived. Walm brushed off the commotion, mumbling that he was sleepy and asking the others not to yell beside his ear. Due's expression hardened as he warned countless battles lay ahead, revealing their new enemy from tomorrow would be Miard. The Hyzerk Empire had already gathered its forces in Soraya City, preparing to sever ties with the Liberatoa Trade Federation that day. Due explained that merging with allies at Soraya City marked only the beginning, since Miard remained their true objective. Unfamiliar soldiers declared they had come for Miard, promising the coming battle would be unlike anything they had faced before. Amid the chaos of battle, a frightened enemy soldier begged for his life, claiming he had a family before he fell. Walm dodged a heavy blow from an armored knight and countered swiftly, and Jose noted the close call marked his 10th kill. Honored soldier mocked Walm for having free time to daydream, calling him rookie and implying combat deserved his focus. Walm snapped back to attention as the group arrived, gazing out over the sprawling, war-torn streets of Soraya City. Jose invited Walm to share a drink with Commander Due that evening, and Walm agreed once morning arrived. Later that night, Walm approached a thin, weary woman on the street, who asked him how about tonight. Jose called out, noting the crowd around them was mostly beggars and prostitutes, and Walm simply said he was fine. The woman asked Walm once more about spending the night together, but he declined, saying he needed nothing from her. Walm handed her some coins instead, telling her to buy something to eat, and she thanked him before leaving. A commander warned Walm not to keep feeding the beggars too much, teasing him for giving away food so freely again. Ballad cautioned Walm that letting his good nature get the best of him could draw every beggar in the city straight to him. Jose called Walm a bloodthirsty machine on the battlefield despite his soft side. And Walm silently thought of the poverty he once knew. Walm recalled how farming alone could never sustain his family, which pushed him to become a soldier just to keep his home standing. He wondered quietly whether his parents and siblings might one day end up just as poor and desperate as the beggars nearby. A soldier asked whether Saraya, once called the Konoha Kingdom, had always looked this ruined, and Due said it used to be fertile. 5 years earlier, Konoha still held its own territory, though its constant border expansion had already begun provoking tension with ISEKAI'D. Walm remembered feeling surprised that his side had somehow won that early battle, and managed to defend a nearby village from ruin. Due explained that Konoha once had abundant land, plentiful people, and delicious food, though its current state told a very different story. Armies from Farius and Myard eventually trampled over Konoha, led by a Myard Grand Duke who had betrayed his homeland for personal gain. The Grand Duke seized Konoha's territory for himself, and one by one, its lands were invaded, vandalized, and turned into scorched earth. ISEKAI'D, lacking enough troops of its own, had postponed invading for years while this ruined land was sold off to Myard's ruler. Due added that Konohan citizens still held a deeper grudge toward Myard and Farius than they ever held toward ISEKAI'D itself. Someone asked how challenging their next opponent might be, and Walm answered flatly that it was an enemy he intended to defeat. The group settled into a tavern near the Liberitoan border, toasting loudly to victory against Myard before digging into their meal. Walm admitted he thought he'd had enough bean soup to last a lifetime, yet somehow still found himself craving another bowl. Someone noticed the commander had clearly had too much to drink, while another quietly asked if Walm himself was doing okay. Walm excused himself to vomit outside, insisting he could still report afterward, though his commander told him it could wait. Alone on a rooftop before the war ever began, Walm admitted quietly that calling himself just a soldier felt deeply hypocritical. A voice cut through the darkness, demanding what he meant by soldier, calling him nothing more than a murderer instead. The following morning, Gerard Berger, commander of the Myard District Army, addressed the gathered troops before their long-awaited assault. Gerard declared that their bravery would finally end this 5-year war, urging every soldier to show no fear trampling their enemies. Soldiers roared as they charged forward, screaming for everyone to kill them all while clashing violently against the enemy lines. Walm trembled afterward, questioning whether killing again as a soldier truly justified it, insisting instead it was simply kill or be killed. Samano noticed Walm looked pale and asked if something had happened, promising to listen whether it concerned money or otherwise. The Empire's army split into 3 troops from Saraya City, targeting every route into Myard, including a fort guarded by 3,000 soldiers. Standing before Saraya's paramount fort, Due reminded his men that this castle held the very outcome of their entire war. Jose vowed to protect Nor from any brutality against women, prompting Burrito to tease him about certain parts of his body shrinking. A soldier admitted this castle siege marked his first real experience in such warfare, since newcomers usually died fast in close combat. He reassured Nor and Burrito that Walm alone could handle any enemy who came near, since Walm killed dozens without expression. Though relieved to hear that, he admitted he still hated watching newcomers die around him during every battle. Nor worried aloud despite hearing that Walm had once defeated 9 enemies during the earlier war against Liberatoa's forces. Soon, the fighting began in earnest, and soldiers braced themselves, shouting that they needed to give this battle everything they had. Arrows rained down near the castle walls as Walm and Due's squad crouched behind barricades, tension rising among the frightened soldiers. Enemy soldiers held their shields steady behind the grain fields while arrows and blades clashed violently against the advancing attackers. Samone screamed that the enemy possessed a skill called hard shoot, warning everyone not to expose themselves near its dangerous key point. A massive water bullet suddenly shattered their barricade, stunning the soldiers as they realized the enemy actually wielded real magic. Amid the chaos, someone shouted, "Now!" signaling their mage to unleash another spell that tore through the battlefield. Commanders ordered the men to surround the enemy, noting the castle walls hadn't been fully encircled yet by their forces. Orders arrived from Battalion Commander Liguria demanding they break through the walls and launch an all-out attack without falling behind. Soldiers scrambled up ladders under heavy fire, and Walm shouted for Nor to stay close behind him during the chaos. Willard struck down an attacker just as Walm braced himself, and Walm thanked him for the timely rescue. Panic spread among the defenders when they realized enemy soldiers had already begun climbing the fortress walls unnoticed. Walm clashed against several soldiers at once, cutting through their defenses, while others shouted for reinforcements to surround him. Walm turned after hearing Nor's voice, spotting a knight looming dangerously close behind her on the battlefield. The armored knight swung his blade with practiced precision, and Walm realized immediately that he faced no ordinary soldier. The knight sneered, calling Walm a nobody only good against fresh recruits, vowing not to let barbarians trample his homeland. Walm barely deflected the knight's heavy axe strike, gritting his teeth as the force behind the blow nearly overwhelmed him. Walm struggled to pierce the knight's thick armor, frustrated that his blade could not cut through despite repeated attempts. Jose noted that ordinarily such an enemy would face Commander Due directly, but constant interference kept them from reaching him. Realizing the knight threatened Nor's safety, Walm cursed under his breath, knowing he had to end this fight. Walm smirked and called the knight the worst, gripping his sword tighter as the exhausting duel dragged on. The knight demanded Walm give up, calling him small fry, yet grew confused when his axe failed to land properly. The knight stared in disbelief, insisting his axe spear should have struck true, yet somehow it missed. Walm felt his body and sword grow strangely light, realizing a magical barrier had quietly enhanced his own power. Walm surged forward with newfound strength, striking through the knight's guard as sparks and debris scattered across the battlefield. The dying knight questioned in disbelief why this boy in front of him could laugh even amid such fierce combat. Other soldiers panicked, realizing their commander had fallen, stunned that a mere soldier could defeat someone with such skill and power. Due roared for everyone to kill every last enemy, declaring they had finally secured a route and urging no one to back down. Walm checked on Nor's injury, relieved to find the wound wasn't too deep despite the danger still surrounding them both. Walm unleashed his newfound power move, crashing through enemy soldiers as bodies scattered, muttering that he simply couldn't resist trying it. Due's shadow loomed as he praised Walm for finding his skill, calling his performance on the battlefield genuinely impressive to witness. Due told Walm to rest while the others handled things, and Walm turned toward Nor, who called out his name with relief. Nor thanked Walm for helping her, admitting the bleeding had finally stopped and she felt ready to return to the front lines. Walm smiled faintly, relieved to hear she was safe, admitting to himself that he had somehow managed to survive it all. The siege ended just before sunset after beginning that same morning, yet Walm understood his true ordeal had only just begun. Walm crouched near the wreckage of a caravan ambush, studying the scattered corpses, while sensing that more than 2 enemy magic users remained active in the surrounding forest. The devastation grew clearer as one soldier's face was found crushed, a wound far too brutal to have come from any ordinary weapon or blade. Days after the failed siege on the ISEKAI'D army, survivors regrouped while guerrilla attacks continued striking supply caravans traveling through the dense forest roads. Commander Due examined the corpse and ruled out a halberd, insisting the crushing damage matched repeated blows from something like a heavy shield. Due turned toward his officers, wondering aloud whether the attacker responsible for the damage actually possessed a special combat skill rather than ordinary weapon. Walm confirmed the theory, explaining that a skill called Iron Wall could turn even a simple wooden shield into something as devastating as solid iron. Standing alert among the trees, Walm realized Myard was deploying skilled fighters for this guerrilla campaign, at least 1 magic user and 1 skill user. Despite sending an entire company after the attackers, ISEKAI'D forces found nothing, and instead lost around 30 of their own men in a single day. To lighten the tension, the soldiers joked about scent and stealth, teasing Walm about wearing a skirt or wearing perfume to lure enemies out. Their laughter faded, replaced by unease as one of them recalled a grim detail from their surroundings that needed to be addressed. Walm looked up to see the hanged bodies of forest people who had betrayed them, having sold their location to the Myard troops earlier. Walking through the ravine, Nor reminded Walm that those very traitors were responsible for the deaths of dozens of their fallen comrades. Back at camp, soldiers debated whether anyone could stand against Commander Due and Walm fighting together, questioning the true threat of their enemies. One officer declared it would be impossible to win, insisting even 20 men together could never overpower fighters of that caliber. Suddenly, their search network detected movement 300 to 400 meters ahead, snapping the group into immediate alert amid the dense trees. Orders rang out to surround the fleeing enemies, with soldiers pushing from multiple directions to trap them before they could escape into hiding. Chaos erupted as unexpected reinforcements arrived, forcing ISEKAI'D troops to realize Myard forces and Due's squad were now colliding in battle. Amid the clashing blades, Walm caught sight of an opening and understood exactly how the enemy had been evading capture for so long. The mysterious fighters were revealed to be leading adventurers, and their leader Emi confirmed everyone had survived while urging her comrades to keep moving. Realizing the truth, Walm understood the defeated Maillard troops succeeded because elite adventurers, dungeon conquerors skilled in fighting demons, had been guiding them. An enemy fighter realized Due possessed the Iron Wall skill, watching helplessly as repeated shield strikes crushed through his defenses. Another soldier questioned why the Adventurers Guild would abandon its neutral stance, suspecting these fighters might actually be freelance mercenaries hired independently for war. Walm spotted a glowing wind blade cutting through the air and recognized another dangerous magic user was targeting him from somewhere. A young woman wielding a rapier and shield stepped forward, declaring she would kill Walm despite his surprise at her age. Walm charged forward with his halberd, exchanging brutal blows against the girl while she deflected his strikes using swift defensive footwork. He struck down one enemy after another, muttering to himself as bodies fell around him during the chaotic forest skirmish. A dying soldier begged for mercy, but Walm told him to give up since no one remained to save him. The girl watched in horror, asking why Walm could kill so mercilessly, her voice trembling as she processed the brutal execution before her. Walm replied flatly that such actions were simply necessary on a battlefield, unmoved by her shocked expression and visible disgust toward him. He added that she herself had likely killed several people already, provoking her anger as their fight resumed with renewed intensity. Another windblade shot toward him with the same trajectory as before, forcing Walm to dodge while the girl declared it was time to die. Their weapons clashed violently again, revealing that she possessed real combat training paired with a formidable power skill of her own. Walm noticed she instinctively shifted into a defensive stance despite being pushed back, realizing she truly wasn't used to killing people. Determined to end things, Walm pressed his attack further, forcing her into a corner as she screamed while barely holding her ground. He warned her coldly to remember this moment, the instant she took a life, before their blades collided once more in fury. Injured and disoriented, she wondered aloud if she was already dead, until a voice suddenly called out to interrupt the fight. Startled, Walm turned just in time as another fighter intervened, clashing weapons to protect the girl from his next attack. The newcomer ordered his leader to stay back, revealing that this girl, Elle, was actually the true leader of the adventurers. Frustrated by the interruption, Walm admitted his hatred for these situations before launching another swift magical strike toward his new opponent. Analyzing the enemy's movements, Walm realized this new fighter was also a wind magic user enhanced by body acceleration abilities. Walm clashed weapons with an enraged enemy calling him an invader, asking if the man truly wanted him as an opponent. The wind magic user used body acceleration to close distance, but Walm admitted he had already adjusted to that exact speed. Elle screamed for Emi to evade as a magical explosion erupted nearby, catching everyone off guard amid the chaotic forest battlefield. Devastated by the destruction around her, Emi shouted furiously at Walm, calling him and his comrades monsters who cared nothing for others' suffering. Walm calmly questioned why people like her assumed they themselves could never die, despite witnessing so much killing around them. Emi broke down crying, screaming for him to shut up as the horror of the ongoing slaughter overwhelmed her in that moment. The fighting resumed, blades and axes clashing violently as Walm pressed forward against another desperate adventurer defending their wounded leader. Grief consumed Emi as she realized Elle had died, watching Walm coldly note that she clearly wasn't used to killing anyone. Suddenly a strange spell tore through the ground nearby, leaving Walm startled and confused about what unfamiliar magic had just appeared. Turning around, Walm found the source of the mysterious attack, recognizing the exhausted magic user responsible standing right behind him. A massive explosion erupted skyward as Walm warned everyone nearby that this powerful attack was absolutely not something to underestimate. Realizing it was a ranged area attack, Walm shouted for his allies to scatter immediately before the destructive spell could engulf them. After the smoke cleared, Walm stood in the ruined forest, quietly noting that the magic user had successfully escaped from him. His squad leader asked whether they should give chase, but the commander admitted her final skill likely took a heavy physical toll. With the remnants of Maillard's army already crushed, the commander decided further pursuit was unnecessary and ordered everyone toward Maillard's capital instead. Walking through the wreckage, Walm reflected that his own side could easily have been the ones dying that day had things differed. Alone in the quiet forest, Walm murmured that he never killed because he wanted to, even as another survivor branded him a monster. A bald sorcerer neared Walm and offered to guide him amid the armed forces' temporary break. Uncertainty crossed Walm's face as he paid attention cautiously to the unusual proposal. Across the quiet riverside encampment, troops kept resting while Walm weighed the opportunity. Interest gradually displaced doubt following Willett clarified his intention to teach sorcery straight. Their clasped palms transferred mystic power into Walm, allowing him to feel unknown might for the first time while close. Troops observed curiously. Other troops observed curiously while Walm kept the unusual sorcery practice with Willett close. A short quip diverted him. Yet Walm swiftly recovered attention under the sorcerer's guidance. Chilly power expanded through their connected palms as mystic might gradually stepped into Walm's body. Willett directed him to picture running water while focusing cautiously on both hands. Drops of water eventually assembled overhead Walm's palm, making him realize he had effectively employed sorcery for the first time. Walm grew thrilled after creating water magic, though Willett deemed his mana output unstable and inadequate. Troops reacted with surprise while Willett clarified that Walm held a second human well for mystic power. Careful instructions followed as Walm discovered water sorcery engulfed fewer mana than destructive elemental techniques. Willett further showed that body reinforcement and combat talents too depended on mystic might. Scenes from savage battles reminded Walm that sorcery and physical techniques were greatly connected on the battleground. Walm acknowledged he could not read properly prior to Willett resolved to test his fire sorcery aptitude next. The lesson kept silently while close. Troops played carelessly with water amid their break. Abruptly, Willett sensed deadly mystic motion and instantly focused his notice towards Walm. Fires burst violently throughout Walm, leaving him startled as the fire rapidly expanded outward. Alarm burst across the encampment following Walm accidentally released uncontrolled fire sorcery able of blazing all things close. The uncontrolled fires expanded through the encampment, making chaos while close. Troops frantically attempted escaping the heat. Dread blanketed Walm's face as he understood the fire sorcery had gone far beyond his command. Willett reacted instantly and hit Walm away prior to the expanding fires could injure all close. Multiple troops were thrown into the river while others gazed quietly at the sudden catastrophe. Wary and panicked, Walm called for Willett following eventually understanding the danger of his personal sorcery. Following calming the situation, Willett confirmed that Walm held powerful aptitude for deadly fire sorcery. One fighter quietly studied the aftermath while the encampment gradually came back to normal conditions. A courier from friendly troops arrived with urgent orders intended specifically for Leader Dewey. The leader reacted seriously following hearing details about the reckless sorcery practice incident. Willett clarified that the approaching conflict would force Dewey's unit to join the main battalion shortly. Military commanders assembled at the plains of Re-Ref, believing Hysark troops would shortly face defeat there. Detailed messages confirmed the foe armed force intended to push straight towards the first stronghold with immense numbers. Lord Farius Winston paid attention steadily, while leaders clarified the deadly battleground situation prior to him. Regardless of the threat, Farius regarded the Hysark troops recklessly and readied strategies to weaken their troops. From the overlooking hill, leaders inspected the battleground cautiously and scoured for weaknesses within the foe ranks. Farius predicted Hysark's strongest cavalry battalion would lead the push amid the approaching combat. With assurance, Farius commanded his troops to achieve triumph for their king at any price. As foe soldiers eventually started traveling, Farius readied himself to destroy both rival forces jointly. The battleground showed an enormous imbalance, with friendly troops seriously outnumbering the moving Hysark troops. Armed leaders and troops assembled across the field, realizing the long-awaited conflict had formally begun. Walm asked why their unit stayed inactive, still following the fierce combat had previously begun close. A veteran fighter silently started explaining the deadly deployment strategy readied prior to the conflict. According to the plan, the Ligurian Battalion and Dewey unit would rush jointly alongside Jeff's cavalry force. Surprise expanded across Walm's face following hearing the reckless strategy involving infantry and cavalry moving simultaneously. Experienced troops sensed the task bore extreme danger, leaving the whole unit greatly restless prior to the assault. Veteran troops acknowledged the plan was awful since infantry would be compelled to run alongside charging horses. The unit clarified that anyone easing down amid the attack would be trampled and slew instantly. Notice abruptly turned towards Walm following troops noted his deadly might amid combat. Leaders thought Walm and Willett could strengthen the battalion since both held unusual mystic skills. Quiet followed as Walm glanced towards the battleground, realizing the approaching attack would become extremely deadly. Walm gazed at the battleground and wondered whether anyone could survive running alongside the cavalry rush. Disorder expanded through the unit following the long-awaited assault orders yet missed to arrive. Experienced troops suspected a thing had gone wrong since their leaders rarely misjudged battleground conditions. Abruptly, Farius's enormous main armed force appeared and crashed straight into the battleground without caution. Alarm burst instantly following foe reserve troops moved towards their location, threatening to wipe out the whole unit. Orders abruptly altered as troops were ordered to assault Farius's stronghold instead of Maillard's troops. Disorder expanded across the battleground since the new command completely contradicted the original plan. Prior to anyone could question further, the cavalry had previously begun charging towards the foe lines. Infantry troops instantly followed behind, compelling Walm and the others to run across the battleground. Resolve displaced dread within Walm as he sprinted forward, fully aware the attack could become his demise. Severe breathing packed the battleground as Walm compelled himself to proceed running through the deadly attack. The cavalry rush crashed straight into foe troops while troops recognized stopping meant certain demise. Walm fought frantically to clash alongside the moving cavalry, eventually reaching the foe infantry line. A mounted fighter slashed down foe troops at full swiftness, expanding gore across the battleground at once. Walm narrowly dodged a deadly assault and kept traveling while chaos engulfed the whole front line. Veteran troops showed the foe troops had been effectively lured away from their original locations. The unit discovered Heiserk intentionally acted frail to deceive both friendly forces into chasing them. Following the diversion succeeded, their real task became attacking the Farius headquarters straight. Walm recognized the whole plan depended on ruining the foe command prior to the decoy armed force fell. Foe guards eventually appeared ahead, compelling the weary troops to ready for another savage fight. Willett called for Walm as foe troops hurried towards their moving unit amid the attack. Without doubt, Walm triggered his unstable fire sorcery while charging across the battleground. A fierce blast smashed the foe ranks and unsealed a route through the defensive line. Foe troops frantically attempted stopping the push, refusing to withdraw regardless of the chaos throughout them. Walm kept combat through the collapsing front line, while blasts and frantic fights expanded across the battleground. Troops frantically removed the anti-cavalry fences while leaders demanded a clear route for the charging horses. Severe wooden barriers gradually fell as weary infantry fought to drag them away in time. Sudden blasts smashed parts of the defensive line and created openings across the battleground. Jeff's battalion shouted warnings while compelling friendly troops to clear the route instantly. Armored cavalry eventually surged through the unsealed route, moving straight towards the foe troops at full swiftness. Armored cavalry troops violently slashed through foe infantry while Walm observed the savage rush proceed forward. One injured fighter fell onto the earth as Walm barely reacted in time to the chaos. Fatigue expanded across the moving soldiers following veterans cautioned the genuine Farius troops yet awaited ahead. A charging horse abruptly crashed through the battleground, compelling close by troops to scatter instantly. Walm narrowly dodged a deadly blow following foe combatants attacked from multiple sides amid the disorder. He spotted foe troops wearing heavier armor and carrying arms different from the soldiers defeated previous. A remaining cavalryman identified the approaching foes as members of the Royal Sentinel unit. Realizing Farius's stronghold was close, Walm shouted for all to keep traveling or die there, and foe fighter abruptly unleashed a mighty assault straight towards the moving troops. Walm stopped the blow with difficulty and instantly recognized the Royal Sentinel held immense power. Walm stopped the Royal Sentinel's assault barely in time, shouting angrily while guarding close by companions frantically. Troops were slaughtered at once by the Royal Sentinels, making all realize flee appeared completely impossible. Now, Due unit spotted foe troops retreating continuously, fearing the rival general might effectively flee the battleground. The leader frantically asked whether foe troops were sacrificing themselves merely to secure their general's flee route. A Royal Sentinel abruptly attacked the leader straight, compelling close by troops to defend him instantly from danger. Walm's mighty assault missed against the Royal Sentinel, shocking him amid their intense battleground confrontation completely. The leader understood his special might move lacked power, leaving him frightened and overwhelmed by danger. Walm was violently hit away, coughing gore while foe cavalry kept moving relentlessly across the battleground. Bleeding strongly, Walm resolved to ignite all things close. By employing fire sorcery prior to the foe fled effectively, foe troops spotted Walm's unusual fires instantly, panicking while ordering all close to slay him swiftly. Foe troops stormed fearlessly through the battleground, while allies cautioned all to avoid Walm's deadly expanding fires. Walm remained encircled by roaring fire, compelling close by foes backward as intense heat engulfed the battleground rapidly. An ally frantically encouraged Walm to end the foe leader prior to all became trapped and slew there. The Royal Sentinel abruptly descended through blazing fires, shocking Walm amid their deadly confrontation, amid blazing surroundings completely. Foe troops screamed in disorder following enigmatic fires engulfed them. Azure fires detonated across the battleground, shocking all as Walm's sorcery transformed dangerously beyond expectations. Farius headquarters panicked following hearing anti-cavalry fortifications were completely shattered by foe troops moving rapidly close by. Lord Winston angrily rejected withdrawal, refusing to abandon the stronghold regardless of worsening battleground conditions surrounding them. A fighter abruptly spotted enormous devastation beyond. While Winston understood the foe had previously fractured through fortifications, Winston gazed intensely ahead, readying himself mentally following hearing the horrifying battleground situation surrounding Farius headquarters. Legends cautioned troops that enigmatic azure fire meant demise itself had eventually arrived upon the battleground. Winston recalled horrifying tales depicting azure fires as the bonfire to the netherworld, causing inescapable ruin. Walm remained amidst blazing bodies and devastation, revealing the horrifying sorcery called Ignis Fatuus, prior to all close. The battleground looked like inferno itself as Winston understood the next victim of those fires would probably be him. Blanketed in soot and gore, Walm grimly faced the commanding general while azure despair expanded across various troops. Walm faced the lone leader across the wrecked battleground while haze drifted through fractured flags. Dirt and gore blanketed Walm's face, yet he stayed quiet following hearing the arrogant title of the foe leader. Winston Farius proudly showed his identity prior to the weary fighter. Recognition expanded between them as both understood the man prior to them was no normal combatant. Fires encircled the field while Walm weighed surrender to survive the unceasing conflict. Winston Farius spoke proudly of his blade and the troops yet combat under his command. Walm quietly observed the leader while the battleground clamor rang behind them. Pride defeated Farius as he rejected the believed of surrender prior to a mere foot fighter. A faint smile appeared on Walm's face following sensing the chance in his foe's motions. Metal gleamed across the scorched field as both men eventually stepped into the deadly fight. Walm narrowly dodged the blow and understood the leader's assault could have slew him at once. Doubt crossed Walm's thoughts as he recognized the foe was a real leader, not a false noble. Fatigue pressed on Walm while his mana faded from continuous battles and blazing azure fires. The leader reacted too late when Walm abruptly hurried forward with immense swiftness. A savage slash tore through the battleground as gore scattered from the leader's injured face. Winston Farius swung his enormous sword repeatedly, while Walm stopped each blow at close range. Strain mounted as Walm missed to find any frailty in the leader's unceasing assaults. Gore burst across the earth following Walm's severed part of Farius's limb amid the fierce exchange. Both combatants widened their distance while the battleground dropped quiet throughout their severe breathing. Farius released a horrifying roar prior to charging once more with enough force to shake the scorched earth. Walm spotted the chance at once when Farius readied to throw away his armament in desperation. The leader stumbled forward as Walm shut the distance without doubt. Chilly resolve packed Walm's gaze while his armored palm reached towards the sapped foe. A fierce blow slashed across Farius's body, scattering gore over the vacant battleground. Farius fell gradually following Walm's sword punctured through his neck and ceased the savage duel. Gore streamed from Farius's neck as he acknowledged defeat while ailing to stay standing. Quiet encircled Walm while he observed the dying leader with weary gaze. Cries rang across the battleground following the fall of the Farius leader became known. Frantic troops tried to flee, but pursuing soldiers swiftly chased following the collapsing troops. Dread expanded through the survivors when Winston Farius eventually dropped onto the wrecked battleground. A remaining fighter abruptly attacked the weary Walm from behind following the combat had ceased. Without altering his look, Walm steadily turned towards the fallen foe fighter. Close by cavalry soldiers confirmed the body belonged to Winston Farius while introducing themselves to Walm. Praise and rewards were offered following news of the leader's demise expanded through the armed force. Fatigue eventually reached Walm as his companions assembled throughout the battered survivor of the battleground. Walm reunited with his remaining companions, while fatigue and wounds blanketed the battered unit. Close by troops silently bore away the corpses scattered across the wrecked battleground. Haze rose into the sky as the victorious armed force thought the lengthy conflict would shortly conclude. Disorder expanded through the foe encampment following news of Winston Farius's demise reached the leaders. Dread and regret engulfed the defeated noble prior to he eventually selected to surrender his nation. A sudden execution hit the surrendering noble prior to the startled crowd could react. Rage burst amid the residents as they denounced the man who abandoned his country. Encircled by innumerable arms, the disgraced noble embraced demise while regretting his choices. Quiet blanketed the wrecked battleground following the lengthy conflict eventually reached its conclude. Following the conflict ceased, Walm stepped into the occupied capital while fatigue yet pressed on his thoughts. Within the big residence, the victorious troops sensed uncomfortable amid the nobles and commanders. Suspicion expanded through Walm's party as they asked the sudden invitation from the Hyzerk armed force. Restless reflections stayed amid the weary survivors while they waited for their promised rewards. Servants steadily readied refreshments as Walm sensed concealed intentions behind the calm meeting. The nervous troops cautiously copied noble etiquette while drinking tea within the grand residence. Different from the others, Walm steadily handled the cup as quiet notice assembled throughout him. Memories from his previous life aided Walm appear far additional refined than the weary troops alongside him. A faint sense of relief crossed Walm's face following tasting proper tea once more for the first time in years. Disorder expanded amid his companions as they asked how a normal farmer could behave so naturally. Leader Belga stepped into the hall while the tense troops instantly straightened their posture. Careful quiet packed the room as Belga steadily studied the weary survivors over tea. Praise was provided to Walm's unit following their achievements. Amid the savage operation became widely known. Belga praised the infantry troops while taking special interest in squad leader Dewey, and Walm's suspicion crossed Walm's face, following the leader accurately portrayed details from his concealed beyond. Belga showed knowledge about Walm's azure fires and the enigmatic might called Ignis Fatuus. Ancient tales about otherworlders and legendary fighters deepened the strain within the quiet hall. A unusual horned mask was placed prior to Walm, instantly drawing his full notice. Belga clarified the mask once belonged to deadly otherworlders, able of employing the same fires as Walm. Restless quiet stayed as Walm wore the mask while Belga steadily approved its appearance. An unusual sensation overwhelmed Walm following the mask awakened memories connected to his original realm. Surprise expanded through the room when the mask abruptly reacted violently in Walm's palms. Dread and disorder burst amid the troops as the cursed object trembled uncontrollably. Belga laughed steadily while realizing the enigmatic mask had embraced Walm as its owner. Careful warnings followed. Following, Belga clarified the uncommon artifact held feelings and a will of its personal. Walm's party left the meeting hall while discussing the unusual mask and their lengthy, exhausting combat. Jokes and amusement momentarily reduced the strain as Walm silently embraced the enigmatic artifact. Beyond the mansion, wrecked roadways and discarded bodies showed the price of the fallen realm. Walm clarified how frantic troops looted the estates following their master's forfeited might and authority. Bitterness stayed amid the survivors as avarice thrust men to rob still the dead they once served. Walm discovered the city had previously fallen into chaos prior to the Hyzerk armed force arrived. Wrecked roadways and rising piles of bodies showed how badly the capital kept to suffer. Orders were provided to Walm's party to restore order and capture surviving foe troops hiding close. By dread expanded amid civilians as frantic men begged for mercy while troops scoured the district. Doubt crossed Walm's thoughts following noticing someone who no longer glanced like a normal fighter. Unusual sounds from a close-by structure drew Walm's party away from the vacant roadways. Within the home, multiple weary troops found a savage scene left behind by drunken men. Surprise packed Walm following learning innocent civilians had been assaulted and murdered amid the chaos. Fury gradually grew within him when the guilty troops faced merely weightless punishment regardless of their crimes. Severe quiet followed as Walm understood triumph had not ceased the cruelty expanding through the city. Detailed descriptions of whipping punishment disturbed Walm while frightened prisoners paid attention in quiet. Dread overwhelmed one seized fighter as armored palms compelled his head down towards the floor. Chilly warnings expanded through the room, following the surviving criminals were commanded to surrender silently. Indifference packed the veteran fighter while Walm quietly fought with the cruelty throughout him. Afterward that night, Walm sat alone under the dim sky, while severe reflections engulfed his weary thoughts. Walm silently smoked alone while attempting to quiet the fatigue and frustration within his thoughts. Dim quiet blanketed the countryside as the twin moons shined overhead the vacant fields. Sleepiness gradually overcame Walm as he rested far from the packed occupied city. Suspicious motion close compelled Walm to instantly raise his armament and scan the darkness. Concealed civilians eventually showed themselves following Walm confirmed he was a Hyzerk fighter on patrol. Late at night, Walm met an elderly man and his daughter traveling beyond the city. Careful scrutiny made Walm suspect the pair were concealing their real origins and motives. The elderly man clarified he raised the girl alone following conflict shattered their surviving household. Abruptly, Walm moved nearer and startled them by grabbing the frightened girl without caution. Amusement eventually shattered the tense mood following Walm understood. His suspicions had been completely wrong. Walm joked awkwardly with the frightened girl, attempting to ease the severe strain between them. Following stopping the elderly man, he silently gave over preserved provisions for their hard journey ahead. Remorse kept pressing on Walm as he reflected on the devastation caused throughout the savage incursion. The youthful woman embraced his kindness sincerely, leaving Walm momentarily speechless alongside the dim roadside. Standing alone afterward, Walm understood little acts of kindness could not ever erase the bloodshed surrounding their existences. Walm observed quietly as the elderly veteran directed Rita away from the wrecked riverbank amid the night. Agony overwhelmed Rita, remembering how the Hyzerk incursion shattered her household and country completely. Regardless of her grief, the elderly man encouraged Rita to survive and proceed guarding the surviving residents of Myard. 2 months afterward, chaos burst once more as frightened troops screamed amid another fierce combat close to the stronghold ramparts. Troops raised their arms while roaring towards the stronghold ramparts. Within the fortress, guards endured another attack as their leader praised their resistance. Beyond the battleground, armored fighters moved nearer and demanded louder cries from the soldiers. Onyx hit forward, following the weary guards missed to reply the remote provocation. 2 months following the blockade of Myard capital, the remaining troops eventually readied to depart Edinburgh. Farius sapped its borders following supporting Myard amid the recent conflict, allowing Hyzerk to start its incursion. 2 battalions shifted ahead first, compelling close by villages and towns along the border into surrender. Additional troops afterward split into separate groups to surround Farius and prevent counterattacks from reaching the main armed force. Walm moved with the second party towards Refn Mine, a strategic border stronghold targeted for blockade. Amid the lengthy march, weary troops divided short amusement prior to returning to the grim operation. Hyzerk trapped 3,000 Farius troops within mountain forts guarded by steep terrain and powerful fortifications. Rather than storming the forts straight, the leaders commanded continuous harassment to destroy foe morale first. Each night, the besieged troops replied with frantic shouting while the assailants taunted their resistance. As supplies dwindled within the forts, the waiting troops handled the blockade like routine task. 2 weeks afterward, Walm kept practice and traveling supplies while unceasing cries rang across the battleground. Walm stepped into a discarded tunnel and discovered his unstable fire sorcery could destroy allies close by. A sorcerer selected the secluded mine as the securest site for his practice. While focusing underground, Walm pictured fires and triggered Ignis Fatuus. The spell burst through the tunnel at once, surprising him with its destructive swiftness and might. Afterward, troops kept their combat exercises while Walm quietly practiced controlling his deadly sorcery. Amid practice, Burrito abruptly overwhelmed another fighter with immense swiftness and power. The defeated combatant fought to recover while close. Troops silently observed the savage sparring match. Burrito taunted his foe further following noticing the fighter's doubt and waning assurance. A severe blow smashed straight into the fighter's face, ending the clash within seconds. Following the match ceased, amusement expanded through the encampment while the weary loser fell into the dirt. Following multiple days of practice, Walm eventually gained partial command over Ignis Fatuus within the tunnel. Yet, fatigue overwhelmed his body each time. The sorcery engulfed too much power. He understood the spell could merely stay active for 30 seconds prior to losing stability. Employing it longer risked draining his mana completely and ruining his physical power afterward. Walm came back to encampment silently, while his companions waited alongside a simple underground meal. Walm employed Ignis Fatuus to heat provisions while resting with the troops within the encampment. Though he hated meal-making tasks, the others valued the hot food amid the grim operation. The company thought good provisions could maintain morale and reduce fatigue across the battleground. Following tasting the meal, Walm silently acknowledged the flavor was surprisingly satisfying. Still so, he reminded himself the sorcery drained all his mana and could not proceed forever. He spotted additional Farius troops abandoning the forts as the blockade kept without rest. Numerous guards surrendered following enduring unceasing harassment and continuous strain from the foe encampment. The assailants taunted the starving troops while enjoying hot food alongside the battleground. Walm pictured the pain within the forts, where weary guards rationed their surviving supplies every day. Though the plan appeared effective, the ruthless method gradually left Walm feeling increasingly disturbed. A fighter advised Walm to enjoy his surviving life while the blockade pulled on endlessly. 3 days afterward, Walm silently studied the battleground and kept studying the foe fortifications. Abruptly, enormous azure fires burst across the stronghold and shattered part of the structure. The guards panicked as the unusual fire expanded rapidly through the ramparts and towers. Amid the chaos, troops hurried through the stronghold searching frantically for the unseen invaders. Walm readied to eliminate each surviving Hyzerk fighter within. Prior to the attack, leaders debated the stronghold terrain and identified direct assaults would fail. Walm obtained orders to infiltrate the fortress and expanded chaos employing Ignis Fatuus within the ramparts. Though reluctant, he embraced the deadly task while another battalion readied to assault simultaneously. That night, the troops finalized their simple plan alongside the strongly guarded stronghold. Concealed close to the ramparts, Walm cautiously studied the defensive tower chosen as their entry target. Walm embraced the infiltration task and ready to create chaos within the foe stronghold. Under the cover of darkness, the attack team hurried towards the fortress ramparts jointly. Amid the push, Walm obtained advice about combining wind sorcery with Ignis Fatuus in combat. The masked fighter then instructed him to practice jumping higher prior to entering the stronghold. Seconds afterward, the unit unleashed upward across the ramparts while stunned guards observed the sudden attack. Following infiltrating the stronghold, the attack unit instantly slew multiple sentinels prior to the guards recognized the situation. Additional foe troops swiftly reacted, compelling the intruders into fierce combat across the tight passages. Metal clashed repeatedly as puzzled guards shouted warnings while injured troops fell onto the stone floor. Without easing down, the unit drove towards the defensive tower that controlled the stronghold fortifications and signals. Seconds afterward, Walm stepped into another chamber and found multiple resting troops completely unaware of the continuing infiltration close by. Within the stronghold passages, the masked infiltrator discarded stealth and showed his appearance without doubt. Azure fires from Ignis Fatuus abruptly burst across the chamber and engulfed close by guards at once. Frightened troops fell screaming as the unnatural fire expanded rapidly through the packed stronghold interior. Meanwhile, puzzled sentinels sensed unusual winds close by but missed to understand the rising devastation throughout them. Shortly afterward, additional guards eventually spotted the catastrophe as blazing fires swallowed another stronghold section completely. Blasts trembled the stronghold as guards hurried across the ramparts following discovering the Hyzerk infiltration. Puzzled troops observed azure fires consume the stone defensive tower regardless of its severe construction. Meanwhile, bowmen and sentinels hurried into ranks while alarm expanded throughout the stronghold passages and battlements. Following securing the upper zone, Walm's unit spotted foe reinforcements climbing from the lower passageways. The masked fighter commanded the passage scorched instantly, so the guards could not retake the seized tower. The masked fighter moved farther into the blazing stronghold without doubt. Close! By guards screamed in agony as Ignis Fatuus kept expanding across the stone passages uncontrollably. Observing the devastation closely, Walm understood his surviving morals were gradually collapsing amid the slaughter. Reflections about murder, pain, and his previous life overwhelmed him while corpses scorched throughout Edinburgh. In the conclude, the masked fighter compelled himself forward and buried those concerns under the battleground chaos. Accepting his role as a fighter, Walm unleashed Ignis Fatuus farther into the blazing stronghold passages. Shortly afterward, guards across the battlements panicked as the azure fires expanded beyond command. Frightened troops screamed frantically for help while blasts and fire engulfed close by parts of the stronghold. Following counting 30 seconds, Walm understood his surviving mana was nearly weary from continuous sorcery employ. Encircled by fires and collapsing pathways, his sapped body eventually fell onto the scorched wooden floor. Wary from continuous sorcery employ, Walm abruptly encountered foe troops within the blazing stronghold passage. The approaching guards swiftly understood he was responsible for the destructive azure fires surrounding the tower. Instead of retreating, the furious troops taunted Hyzerk and blamed them for the blockade pain. Meanwhile, the masked fighter moved forward steadily while foe soldiers readied themselves for another frantic combat. Walm weary his surviving sorcery while facing furious troops alone on the battleground. A horned fighter hurried forward and swung his spear with immense force towards the foe line. Metal collided at once as Walm stopped the deadly blow and observed his foe cautiously. The combat turned chaotic when another assault compelled both combatants backward in midair. Surprise crossed the fighter's face following Walm abruptly released a concealed assault from underneath. Walm assembled the last of his power and released Ignis Fatuus across the battleground. Fires detonated forward and compelled the foe fighter to withdraw in surprise. A swordsman shattered through the blazing assault and shut the distance towards Walm instantly. Their arms clashed repeatedly as both combatants scoured for enchants amid the fierce exchange. Sharp projectiles abruptly encircled the horned fighter and trapped him from each direction. A fierce blast expanded across the battleground and blanketed the zone with haze and debris. Multiple troops halted traveling as they scoured the blazing field for signs of Walm's existence. The foe party swiftly analyzed Walm's skills and readied a coordinated assault against him. One fighter moved cautiously through the haze while observing for sudden motion close. Walm appeared without caution and targeted the fire user prior to the others could react. Walm dodged multiple assaults while pushing the foe combatant towards the edge of the battleground. The horned fighter understood each fighter supporting Walm held deadly combat talent. Multiple opponents encircled the fighter and compelled him to defend against assaults from each direction. and bolt abruptly punctured through the air and disrupted the fighter's next motion completely. Walm employed the chance instantly and thrust his assault straight into the foe's body. One fighter diverted the horned fighter while another combatant readied an assault from behind. The fighter unleashed Ignis Fatuus once more and blanketed the battleground with fierce fires. Fire resistance sapped the foe's advantage, compelling the fighter to scorch through his surviving sorcery. An injured fighter shouted a caution following noticing another deadly assault forming close. Two opponents stormed jointly at the horned fighter and drove him into a frantic situation. The horned fighter spotted the foe troops risking themselves to guard their injured companions. A strongly armored combatant hurried forward and unleashed a direct attack towards the fighter. Both combatants abruptly halted following realizing they had stepped into striking distance at the same instant. The fighter swung his armament first and compelled the armored fighter backward with a savage blow. Another assault slashed across the battleground, making the fighter to lose attention for an instant. The horned fighter spotted the foe troops risking themselves to guard their injured companions. A strongly armored combatant hurried forward and unleashed a direct attack towards the fighter. Both combatants abruptly halted following realizing they had stepped into striking distance at the same instant. The fighter swung his armament first and compelled the armored fighter backward with a savage blow. Another assault slashed across the battleground, making the fighter to lose attention for an instant. The horned fighter hurried forward once more and hit the injured fighter prior to he could recover. Haze blanketed the battleground as another combatant observed the savage scene in quiet. The fighter remained motionless alongside the fallen body while readying for the next combat. Dread expanded across the surviving fighter following realizing he was the last foe left living. The injured combatant faced the horned fighter straight and recognized the combat would shortly conclude. Gore burst from the injured fighter's mouth following the horned fighter landed another savage blow. The fighter seized his foe tightly and rejected to release him amid the struggle. A sudden assault punctured towards the fighter from behind while the trapped fighter attempted escaping. Another combatant hurried forward and swung his sword straight at the fighter's head. The surviving fighter screamed frantically while compelling the fighter into close combat once more. The remaining fighter attacked wildly while screaming in rage following observing his companion's fall. The horned fighter endured the attack and pulled his foe into close combat once more. A severe blow sent the weary fighter crashing across the smashed battleground. The fighter pressed forward instantly and kept attacking prior to the fighter could recover. Both combatants fell jointly following pushing their battered corpses beyond their physical limits. The weary fighter abruptly seized the horned fighter and pulled him into the earth. Agony expanded across both combatants as neither side released their deadly hold. The horned fighter locked his limb throughout the fighter's neck and tightened the chokehold. Both men fought violently while their power gradually faded amid the savage grapple. The fighter compelled the hold tighter and observed the fighter weaken with each passing instant. The scorched combatant abruptly attacked from behind and nearly drew the horned fighter off sentinel. Another fighter arrived at the battleground and checked whether the fighter had survived the clash. The horned fighter gratefully acknowledged the fighter for rescuing him amid the deadly combat seconds previous. Fatigue blanketed the fighter's face as the fighter understood how close he had come to demise. The remaining combatants eventually withdrew from the battleground and readied to receive medical treatment. The horned fighter rested within the fortress while questioning the devastation caused by Ignis Fatuus. Loud clamor rang beyond as troops kept combat close to the fortress gate. The weary fighter observed the battleground silently and wondered why the troops enjoyed unceasing bloodshed. In the realm of Christ, commanders from neighboring nations assembled following Hyzerk realm moved across the border. Within the fortress, the meeting focused on readying a countermeasure against the rising military threat. An unusual man stepped into the hall while troops guarded each corner of the chamber. Hugo Evans observed steadily from his seat as strain expanded amid the officials. Abruptly, sorcery burst from his palm and trembled the fortress ramparts, leaving the room in quiet. Hugo Evans smoked quietly while studying the anxious officials throughout the chamber. A servant neared and gave him another pipe without questioning his appearance. Meanwhile, the rulers of Christ and Farius readied themselves to discuss Hyzerk's invasion. Barristan spotted Hugo's altered look and understood the quiet man no longer appeared frail. Prior to the meeting kept, Hugo moved his notice towards an enigmatic woman amid the delegates. Hugo silently studied Rita Miard following she introduced herself prior to the assembled delegates. 3 weeks following the stronghold fell, the conflict moved towards the Refn mine base. Walm obtained news that his exhausting assignment had eventually come to an conclude. From the hills, he observed Farius troops stay trapped within the mines amid repeated assaults. Regardless of their supplies and numbers, the unceasing blockade gradually sapped both their corpses and mines. The Hyzerk caution compelled the surviving forts and mine fortress to surrender one following another. Following receiving the report, Walm silently readied to depart the battleground behind. He crossed the battered town where weary troops gradually came back from the blockade. Lines of surrendered Farius soldiers remained quietly while Walm strode beyond them without emotion. Afterward, members of his original unit welcomed him back following months of savage combat. Following returning to encampment, Walm reunited with Nor and the troops recovering from combat wounds. Amid their conversation, Nor noted the savage assault on the fortress and Burrito stayed afterward. Hearing the name, Walm turned throughout in surprise as someone neared from behind them. Burrito emerged with a completely new hairstyle and a vacant look across his face. The unusual appearance instantly puzzled Walm while the others fought to hold back their amusement. The troops confirmed Burrito survived the combat, though his appearance became a continuous quip amid the party. Walm attempted easing the mood while the weary unit gradually recovered from the recent combat. Shortly following, new orders arrived as their troops readied to push farther into Farius territory. Far away, representatives assembled once more within the fortress to discuss political matters. Amid the meeting, Hugo asked why the Principality of Maiard abruptly sent a representative following disappearing for years. Rita clarified that Maiard yet controlled the land of Serta, regardless of losing most of its territory. Hugo instantly understood the territory had become the home of a deadly lake dragon. The meeting dropped quiet following Rita showed the monster had previously been subdued months previous. Notice shortly turned towards the fighter responsible for defeating the enormous beast alone. That fighter was showed to be Walm, a visitor from another realm carrying immense might. Amid the continuing incursion, a party of Hysark troops proudly abused their might across the occupied Farius villages. Avarice and bloodshed expanded wherever they halted. Once the settlement had been stripped of valuables, the troops readied to proceed towards another settlement. Messages from Maiard convinced them no grave resistance stayed close by along the route. An enormous transport wagon remained silently alongside the battered structures as the troops carelessly passed through the tight roadway. Without caution, the wagon abruptly fell and buried multiple men under severe debris and smashed wood. Dust blanketed the battleground while remaining troops understood unknown assailants had unleashed an intended surprise attack from concealed locations close by. The remaining Hysark troops swiftly understood they had been completely encircled within the wrecked settlement. Dread expanded as motion appeared from each direction through the dust and collapsing structures. Shortly afterward, strongly armed Chris troops showed themselves and stopped each possible flee route throughout the zone. Unable to match the foe's power, multiple Hysark soldiers panicked and discarded their stolen supplies to rescue themselves from certain demise. Employing the disorder and dust as cover, the survivors frantically tried to flee through the shattered roadways while questioning Crest's sudden appearance. Their withdrawal instantly halted following an enigmatic youthful sorcerer appeared ahead of them and steadily demanded their surrender. Messages from the battleground showed that 3 Saria battalions had been completely shattered, leaving hundreds of Hysark troops missing without a trace. Following hearing the news, Walm instantly asked why withdrawal sustain was abruptly being debated amid their intended incursion operation. Shortly afterward, returning troops clarified that the Conflict Council had obtained unexpected information from multiple fronts across the territory. The leaders then confirmed that Farius, Christ, Liberatoa, and the surviving troops of Maiard had formed a military coalition against Hysark. Quiet expanded through the encampment as Walm and the others understood nearly each nation in the northern archipelago had become their foe. Within the encampment, Walm and the commanders calculated the foe's rising power following the unexpected coalition between neighboring nations. The situation became grimmer as messages estimated additional than 20,000 additional troops gathering close to the border. Shortly afterward, leaders confirmed that the combined friendly armed force previously exceeded 60,000 soldiers, far beyond Hysark's original expectations. Meanwhile, Farius formally suggested a 4-nation coalition to organize military actions against the Hysark realm. The commanders debated plans to unite their economies and forces while employing Lake Serta as their central strategic territory. As the meeting kept, Hugo silently laughed while Rita sensed a thing disturbing behind his reaction. Within the coalition meeting, Hugo paid attention silently while the commanders debated the future of each nation involved in the conflict against Hysark. Meanwhile, Hysark leaders readied a defensive withdrawal towards the Saraveo fortresses following identifying the danger of the foe coalition. Walm afterward discovered that the armed force intended to abandon the mine and regroup for a decisive combat alongside their friendly troops. Though numerous troops worried the immense foe numbers, the withdrawal became inescapable as the situation worsened across the front lines. Prior to leaving the stronghold, Walm spotted haze rising from the remote mountains while the armed force readied its last resistance. As the withdrawal kept, Walm discovered the armed force intended to fall the mine prior to abandoning the zone completely. Shortly afterward, commanders showed that each captive surviving within the stronghold would too be executed amid the withdrawal mission. While moving through the stronghold, troops debated how Maiard troops had previously seized close. by castles and enslaved seized civilians. Hearing the messages, Walm silently recognized why the leaders no longer thought compromise or mercy stayed possible in the conflict. Afterward, the defending soldiers obtained orders to stay within the mines and guard the retreating Hyzerk troops from pursuing foes. As the friendly armed force moved towards the stronghold ramparts, Hyzerk guards frantically attempted to stop foe troops from placing ladders along the ramparts. Bolts and falling assaults hit the climbers while guards drove multiple troops away from the ramparts prior to they could reach the top. Meanwhile, severe stones crashed across the battleground and shattered ladders as alarm expanded amid the attacking soldiers underneath. Amid the chaos, the guards understood Liberatoa troops had joined the front lines as part of the four-nation coalition attack. The bombardment intensified seconds afterward, compelling injured troops to withdraw while others frantically scoured for safety behind the stronghold ramparts. The savage attack kept across the stronghold ramparts as guards and assailants clashed in close combat. Multiple troops were thrown down from the ramparts amid the chaos, while the left wing started losing earth close by soldiers urgently called for Walm to reinforce the collapsing defensive line. Following receiving the order, Walm instantly hurried towards the battleground while leaders ready to counterstrike against the moving coalition troops. Within the stronghold passages, fierce combat burst as foe troops shattered through and overwhelmed multiple Hyzerk guards in savage combat. Amid the disorder, Walm abruptly sensed danger approaching and cautiously observed the foe motion ahead of him. Amid the fierce combat within the stronghold, Walm abruptly halted following sensing a deadly appearance traveling through the battleground at high swiftness. Realizing the foe breakthrough could not be halted normally, he resolved to employ a mighty skill regardless of the severe risks involved. Close by troops instantly took cover as Walm readied his assault while the combat kept across the collapsing defensive line. At the same time, foe soldiers moving towards the stronghold gate spotted an unusual strain expanding through the zone and became restless. Seconds afterward, Walm appeared overhead the battleground encircled by fierce power as the whole stronghold trembled under him. As Walm readied his assault, frightened foe troops identified the destructive fire technique he intended to release across the battleground. Seconds afterward, an enormous blast burst close to the stronghold ramparts and at once engulfed multiple moving coalition soldiers in fires. The fire kept expanding through the battleground while injured troops screamed under the collapsing debris and blazing earth. Alarm swiftly expanded amid the assailants as remaining soldiers frantically attempted to extinguish the fires prior to the whole attack force fell. Observing the devastation from overhead, Walm silently sensed the immense scent of troops blazing living across the battleground. Following the fires disappeared, Walm strode through the battered stronghold while remaining troops gradually reformed throughout the defensive line. Multiple guards gratefully acknowledged him for rescuing their existences amid the coalition attack and praised the devastation caused by his assault. Shortly afterward, leaders commanded the soldiers to rebuild fortifications, handle the injured, and ready for the next stage of combat. Amid the briefing, Walm discovered the foe had become frightened of the fire technique that ravaged their troops seconds previous. Though the troops regarded his might as horrifying, Walm steadily acknowledged he had previously become accustomed to employing such destructive skills. Two troops studied the foe stronghold while the armed force stayed trapped underneath the mountain route. Triumph depended on ruining the stronghold prior to reinforcements arrived. Emred readied himself to force a route through the stronghold regardless of the immense defensive surrounding Hyzerk's location. Dread expanded across the encampment following messages portrayed a horrifying armament called the Fire from Inferno. Reports about a ruthless fighter reached the soldiers. His savage talent shattered whole ranks without leaving survivors behind. Corpses blanketed the battleground close to the ramparts. Still, the leader who once led the attack missed to survive the slaughter. Emred inspected the stronghold in quiet while his company assembled behind him close to the mountain trail. Resolve displaced the dread expanding through the weary troops. Seconds afterward, the attack unit hurried forward following receiving the order to start the deadly assault against the foe ramparts. Within the stronghold, Walm studied the approaching soldiers and instantly recognized that the intended attack had eventually begun. The troops halted at a calculated distance and readied a simultaneous assault while keeping their ranks steady under the towering gate. Tension packed the battleground since the soldiers knew Ignis Fatuus could destroy whole ranks within seconds, leaving few survivors behind following the fight ceased. The assault eventually started following the new company leader displaced the fallen officer from the previous attack. Troops stormed across the battleground and hurried straight towards the stronghold entrance, while guards guarded the moving ranks. Guards swiftly spotted the incoming assault and commanded all under the ramparts prior to the foe reached their location. Bolts abruptly rained across the battleground and hit multiple troops prior to they could safely near the stronghold gate. Regardless of the severe casualties, the remaining soldiers kept forward and instantly readied ladders to climb the enormous ramparts. Attack soldiers reached the stronghold ramparts and instantly raised ladders, while guards blanketed the troops from incoming assaults. Assurance gradually came back following multiple troops effectively climbed the ramparts with fewer casualties than anticipated amid the push. Abruptly, fierce blasts burst overhead the stronghold gate and shattered the ladders supporting the attacking soldiers. Ignis Fatuus unleashed another devastating assault across the battleground, compelling the surviving troops to withdraw towards the trenches. Chaos expanded through the collapsing ranks as injured soldiers dropped across the blazing earth while survivors fought to flee the deadly attack. Emrid gazed at the blazing stronghold passage following the guards shattered their personal location without caution to stop the attack. Sweat blanketed his face as he understood the foe leader no longer cared about sacrificing troops amid the combat. Still witnessing the devastation, Emrid drove forward and commanded the remaining soldiers to climb the stronghold rampart instantly. Big projectiles abruptly crashed onto the battleground from overhead, confusing the troops and shattering their moving ranks close to the ramparts. His own enormous object landed straight on the stronghold rampart seconds afterward, compelling Emrid to freeze as dread expanded across the battleground once more. Emrid cautiously studied the blazing stronghold passage, while disorder expanded amid the weary troops close to the battered ramparts. Shortly, he understood the foe troops had previously begun retreating following intentionally setting fire to the stronghold amid the attack. Orders were instantly provided to extinguish the fires while multiple platoons stayed alert for possible foe motions close. Bias scouts swiftly came back from the route ahead and reported unusual activity beyond the stronghold zone. Surprise appeared across Emrid's face following learning the foe had shattered the military route prior to escaping from the battleground completely. The wrecked town dropped farther into chaos as the foe resolved the conflict against Hyzerk was no longer worth continuing. Retreating troops shattered houses and stopped the routes with rubble to delay anyone chasing behind them. Multiple workers buried wooden pillars under the earth while fires kept expanding across the battered roadways. Unweary fighters scoured for additional materials prior to abruptly noticing the appearance of an approaching platoon leader close by. Seconds afterward, urgent orders expanded through the battleground following messages confirmed that Liberatoa troops were rapidly moving towards the town. The weary troops eventually obtained orders to withdraw following the missed mission left the battleground in complete chaos and devastation. While escaping through the wrecked roadways, a youthful fighter secretly spotted a valuable pouch discarded amid the scattered debris close by. Rather than returning the item, he silently resolved to keep it for himself while the withdrawal kept throughout the collapsing town. Meanwhile, the surviving soldiers hurried towards the evacuation route and worried that some troops had been left behind amid the disorder. Following regrouping beyond the battleground, the survivors readied to abandon the deadly mining territory and proceed their lengthy withdrawal towards safety. The remaining Hyzerk troops readied for the next combat as their troops shifted towards Sarajevo's stronghold following the missed withdrawal mission. Meanwhile, the Quadruple Coalition kept moving across the territory while ruining bridges, routes, and mountains to strain Hyzerk's armed force. Hyzerk's delaying tactics eventually slowed the foe push close to Refenmine and bought enough time for the armed force to flee safely. Wary troops eventually reached Farius military encampment while carrying injured companions through the packed battleground encampment. Within the encampment, wounded soldiers frantically scoured for healers as the remaining troops fought to recover from the savage combat. A injured fighter frantically scoured for help following his wounded friend kept losing gore within the packed military encampment. One armored fighter eventually promised that treatment would be arranged, giving the weary survivor a little sense of hope. Following entering the medical zone, the youthful fighter was commanded to depart his armament behind prior to traveling further within the encampment. Rows of severely wounded troops packed the temporary shelter while healers fought to care for all yet living. The injured man was cautiously placed alongside the others as close by medical workers ready to start urgent treatment within the overcrowded infirmary. The injured troops observed in surprise as an enigmatic healer restored a shattered limb with mighty healing sorcery within the encampment. Within seconds, each wounded fighter brought prior to or survived, leaving the weary survivors overwhelmed with ease and doubt. The troops shortly discovered that the healer was Sugimoto Ayane, one of Christ's legendary champions known throughout the battleground. Ayane steadily kept treating the injured while keeping a chilly look regardless of the frantic situation surrounding the infirmary. Grateful survivors repeatedly gratefully acknowledged her following witnessing wounded troops recover from wounds that normally would have ceased their existences. Ayane silently clarified that she selected healing sorcery since she lacked the power to clash straight on the battleground. Afterward, she spoke with Maya while the injured troops kept receiving treatment within the packed military encampment. Though praised for rescuing numerous existences, Ayane yet weighed herself inexperienced compared to the other champions alongside her. Maya encouraged her to gain additional assurance and reminded her that the troops greatly valued her efforts amid the combat. Their conversation shortly moved towards the recent cavalry combat, where numerous troops suffered severe assaults but managed to survive without severe wounds. Following finishing their task within the encampment, Ayane and Maya went to meet the weary troops resting close to the tents. The reunited party spoke about the hard combat while feeling relieved that all had survived the recent combat safely. Conversation shortly moved towards the foe cavalry battalion and the deadly assaults they barely fled amid the withdrawal mission. Maya afterwards showed that the Farius armed force had rewarded them with valuable provision supplies for rescuing vital troops amid the conflict. Excited by the news, the weary champions instantly hurried towards the encampment while close by troops observed the famous Christ champions with curiosity. The Christ champions were introduced across the encampment, revealing their mighty skills in healing, elemental sorcery, and holy combat techniques. Close-by troops admired the youthful champions and thought they would become essential for supporting Hyzerk amid the continuing conflict. While the encampment gradually came back to normal, one fighter silently bore provisions and strode alone through the woods route, far away from the others. A grave fighter readied himself as the conflict between reincarnated combatants and transmigrated troops neared its decisive combat. The retreating Hyzerk armed force crossed wrecked routes and fell bridges left behind, following the previous battles across the border territory. Wary troops kept moving through the woods while silently admiring the enormous defensive structure waiting ahead of them. Shortly, the armed force eventually arrived at Sarajevo Stronghold, a gigantic stronghold built to defend the surrounding territory from incursion. The stronghold remained close to the former Myard border and guarded a vital route leading farther into Hyzerk territory. Since mountains and demon territory encircled the zone, Sarajevo Stronghold became a nearly impossible defensive location for foes to bypass effectively. Sarajevo Stronghold became overcrowded as innumerable troops assembled within the stronghold following retreating from the savage battles close to the mines. Provisions shortages swiftly expanded across the encampment, compelling numerous weary troops to survive on uncooked potatoes amid the hard healing period. Different from the others, one fighter secretly employed sorcery to ready baked potatoes, while avoiding notice from close-by soldiers. Multiple companions spotted his unusual meal and observed curiously as he enjoyed provisions readied through forbidden sorcery within the stronghold. The troops assembled throughout Walm shortly afterward, surprised by his meal, making method while the weary encampment gradually recovered its morale. Walm abruptly panicked following noticing close-by troops reacting strangely while he secretly employed forbidden sorcery within the stronghold encampment. An enigmatic bald fighter neared him steadily and instantly sensed traces of sorcery leaking from the freshly baked potato. Dread expanded across Walm's face as he understood the stranger recognized his connection to Ignis Fatuus and deadly fire sorcery. Walm boiled potatoes while moving with the weary troops. Irritation expanded across his face as another comrade drove extra task onto him. Dust blanketed the wrecked route while the soldiers kept forward. Starvation sapped all, yet the scent of hot provisions gradually drew their notice. Multiple troops spotted Walm carrying cooked potatoes alongside his gear. Disorder and doubt followed him through the moving line. Fatigue overwhelmed the party following days without proper food. Hope momentarily came back as the troops pictured eating a thing hot once more. At last, Walm embraced their request and bore the burden jointly with the others. Walm crossed the devastated land carrying a steaming pot packed with boiled potatoes. Frustration followed each step as he asked why he had become the armed forces cook instead of a normal fighter. Hot steam drifted through the moving ranks and swiftly drew all's notice. Weary soldiers turned towards Walm following days of remaining without proper food. Hungry troops encircled him while throwing jokes and complaints at the unusual sight. Still, their gaze stayed fixed on the pot hanging alongside his gear. Additional men asked for potatoes as the march kept through the battleground. Fatigue sapped order faster than foe assaults. Shortly, an whole line followed behind Walm while the armed force moved towards another savage clash. Walm eventually embraced payment from hungry troops who begged for boiled potatoes amid the march. What started as a little favor gradually turned into an unusual business within the weary armed force. Grateful soldiers enjoyed the uncommon taste of hot provisions while haze drifted through the battleground route. Walm quietly observed them recover a little power from the simple meal. Shortly, Norse spoke with another fighter about hunting talents and remaining beyond the encampment. Ideas for finding better ingredients swiftly expanded amid the party. Excitement packed Nor's thoughts, following realizing they could earn coins by making additional provisions amid the journey. Walm instantly became the center of notice once more. Their plans abruptly halted when danger burst close. By and the battleground came back to chaos. The troops shouted at Walm following. He nearly wrecked another batch of potatoes amid the march. Still, the weary soldiers rejected to eat scorched provisions. Regardless of the complaints, the party kept surrounding Walm while he bore the steaming pot across the battleground encampment. Amusement momentarily displaced the strain of conflict. Night eventually blanketed the wrecked stronghold as scattered troops rested alongside little fires. The temporary peace sensed fragile amid the shattered ramparts and quiet tents. Afterward, Walm paid attention cautiously while messages about the foe expanded through the encampment. All recognized the genuine combat would shortly start. A darker mood settled over the troops following they pictured the innumerable bodies waiting within the stronghold ahead. The troops assembled throughout the fire and spoke about the approaching combat. Under the amusement and rough jokes, dread silently expanded through the weary unit. Walm paid attention in quiet while the encampment gradually settled into the chilly night. All recognized that numerous troops would not ever survive the stronghold attack ahead. Still so, multiple men compelled themselves to smile and handled the evening like a last celebration prior to demise reached them. Afterward, Walm observed his companions laugh and ready for tomorrow's march. Their carefree demeanor sensed unusual against the unceasing bloodshed surrounding the encampment. Following the clamor faded, Walm sat alone alongside the wooden rampart and gazed into the dim battleground while smoking silently through the night. Chilly air swept through the stronghold while Walm rested alone along the wooden walkway. Another fighter spotted the severe look concealed behind his quiet face. Walm silently smoked while thinking about the unceasing combat surrounding the realm. Doubt gradually grew within him as he asked how lengthy the conflict would proceed. The conversation turned towards triumph, yet the reply brought little relief. Winning no longer sounded certain following witnessing innumerable deaths across the battleground. Walm recalled how Heiser kept combat through conquest and force. Unceasing conflicts had previously engulfed whole nations and shattered innumerable existences. Regardless of the dread expanding through the encampment, the troops yet attempted convincing themselves the stronghold could survive the approaching assault. Walm rested alongside another fighter on the stronghold rampart while smoking silently through the chilly night. Afterward, they divided elderly fruit wine taken from the stronghold supplies. Walm instantly regretted the sour taste, while his comrade enjoyed observing his reaction. After another drink, he coughed. Yet the atmosphere between them gradually grew lighter. Fatigue and dread momentarily disappeared amid their little break from conflict. Under the dim sky, the two troops kept drinking and laughing jointly on the wooden platform. The calm instant sensed precious prior to the next combat arrived. Both forces assembled beyond the stronghold and raised their arms prior to the assault started. Strain expanded across the battleground as troops readied for the approaching fight. Shortly, leaders provided the order to fire without doubt. Both forces instantly crashed together and transformed the open field into turmoil. Bolts and sorcery rained down across the battleground while screaming troops dropped one following another. The earth swiftly packed with corpses and fractured guards. From the stronghold rampart, Walm observed foe soldiers proceed moving through the haze regardless of the severe losses. The combat displayed no indication of easing down. Afterward, the troops shifted through piles of bodies scattered across the wrecked zone. Still remaining foes stayed buried under the unceasing dead. Foe troops climbed the stronghold ramparts while guards frantically attempted pushing them back. Fractured guards and scattered corpses blanketed the battleground underneath. A severe assault abruptly hit the front line and hurled multiple troops away. Alarm expanded as injured men fought to stand once more amid the attack. Additional impacts smashed against the stronghold while weary guards barely maintained their locations. The continuous combat gradually drained all guarding the rampart. Walm studied haze rising from the close, by bastion following hours of combat. Though the foe had not fractured through yet, the situation kept worsening. Shortly, troops started urgently searching for Walm across the stronghold rampart. The tense mood made him realize another deadly assignment was waiting ahead. A courier urgently reached Walm amid the stronghold defensive and delivered a direct order from the leader. Foe soldiers were close to shattering through the rear line. Regardless of the deadly situation, Walm replied with dry humor while readying to employ Ignis Fatuus once more. The nearby troops could do nothing except watch anxiously. Shortly, another fighter directed Walm across the battleground towards the collapsing defensive point. Haze and fire blanketed the zone underneath the stronghold ramparts. Walm swiftly understood the situation had become far grimmer than anticipated following witnessing the foe push. Fatigue expanded across the friendly troops as foe troops concentrated on a single frail point. All recognized the stronghold could fall if the line fell. Walm readied to employ Ignis Fatuus following receiving guards from the close, by troops. The guards instantly recognized he was about to stop the foe push by force. Standing on the stronghold rampart, Walm cautiously studied the dense ranks gathering underneath. The tightly packed foe soldiers created the perfect target for his assault. Fires abruptly burst across the battleground and expanded straight into the moving troops. Alarm swiftly displaced assurance as the foe line fell into disorder. Blasts and blazing debris tore through the ranks, while troops frantically attempted escaping the devastation. Corpses were thrown across the battleground amid the fierce collision. The whole zone descended into chaos as fire engulfed the attacking force and smashed their attack. Blazing troops fell across the battleground following Walm unleashed Ignis Fatuus into the foe ranks. Fire expanded rapidly while the guards observed the devastation underneath the stronghold rampart. The fires kept swallowing the battleground as frightened troops missed to flee the blast. Haze and blazing debris blanketed the whole zone. Standing overhead the chaos, Walm steadily studied the foe force shattering apart under the assault. Cries rang across the battleground while the remaining troops scattered in alarm. Behind the demon mask, Walm no longer sensed dread or doubt amid combat. The savage battleground gradually altered the way he regarded himself. As the combat kept, Walm fully embraced his role as a fighter created by conflict. Following the foe attack missed, the leader praised Walm for guarding the stronghold line. The weary guards eventually gained a short instant to breathe. Walm silently embraced the praise while haze and fire kept rising from the battleground underneath. Ignis Fatuus had ravaged the foe ranks beyond recognition. Messages shortly confirmed that hundreds of troops had perished or suffered severe wounds amid the assault. The friendly armed force was compelled to withdraw temporarily following the severe losses. Remaining foe troops spoke fearfully about the fires that shattered their companions. Walm's assault swiftly became known across the battleground. Far from the stronghold, the Christ armed force reorganized its surviving troops within the battered military encampment. Following the combat, the medical encampment overflowed with injured troops, pain from burns, fractures, and severe gore loss. The healers fought to rescue all as alarm expanded through the tents. Within a single hour, innumerable wounded men were brought into the encampment from the battleground. Shortly, healers found that numerous scorched troops could no longer breathe properly since the fire had battered their lungs. Some wounds stayed impossible to handle from the beyond. Walm cautiously studied one dying fighter whose state abruptly worsened regardless of treatment. Dread silently came back as he understood how savage Ignis Fatuus truly was. The weary healers frantically kept working while additional injured troops fell across the packed encampment. Agony packed the medical encampment as scorched troops screamed following receiving urgent treatment. The healers worked without rest while additional injured kept arriving from the battleground. One healer silently understood that normal treatment methods were no longer enough for the severe burns caused by the fires. Dread and fatigue gradually appeared across her face. Regardless of the dire situation, she kept traveling between wounded troops and apologizing to those she could not fully rescue. The encampment became additional frantic with each passing instant. Multiple injured men begged for help while ailing against intolerable agony and dread of demise. Their pain greatly shook all close. By still so, the healer comforted the wounded troops and kept caring for them through the unceasing night. Within the overcrowded medical tent, the healers found that scorched armor and skin had fused jointly. Maya steadily resolved the merely way to rescue the fighter was to slash the armor away. Another injured man abruptly fell close by while the weary healers kept working without rest. The unceasing emergencies drove all nearer to their limits. Maya acknowledged that her mana was nearly weary following treating innumerable wounded troops throughout the combat. Still so, she rejected to stop helping the injured. Gathering her surviving power, Maya compelled herself to proceed the treatment regardless of the agony and fatigue. The battleground had previously seasoned her determination. By sunrise, the flow of wounded troops eventually started to slow across the encampment. Maya strode beyond piles of injured and dead troops scattered throughout the encampment. Fatigue blanketed her face as another healer spotted she yet had not rested. One remaining fighter gratefully acknowledged Maya repeatedly following receiving treatment for his wounds. The battleground behind them stayed packed with haze and corpses. The wounded man remembered witnessing the azure fires of Ignis Fatuus and believing he would die. Dread kept expanding amid the survivors who witnessed the assault. Maya steadily advised the injured troops to rest and recover their power following treatment. Regardless of her fatigue, she kept helping all throughout her. Afterward, Maya acknowledged how greatly the conflict frightened her. Yet she smiled while thanking the survivors for staying living. Night blanketed the battleground while troops prayed for their remote friends to survive the expanding fires of conflict. Within the encampment, leaders assigned a vital task to a trusted unit and commanded them to stay quiet until the target appeared. Shortly, the unit obtained their real objective: assassinate the user of Ignis Fatuus prior to another catastrophe occurred. Leaders debated the dying blockade while the Hyzarch armed force fought to break the stronghold fortifications. Assurance within the encampment gradually sapped. Shortly following, news arrived that 2 bastions had previously fallen overnight. The commanders understood the battleground had abruptly altered. Messages showed the catastrophe was caused by a single Hyzerk fighter. Additional than 100 foes perished amid the fierce breakthrough. Within the tent, remaining unit commanders assembled to explain the combat. Walm remained quietly while others observed him with unease. Though strongly injured and barely able to move, Walm personally appeared prior to the leaders and embraced burden for the assault. Walm lowered his head prior to the leaders and acknowledged his reckless choice amid the mission. Following receiving orders, the troops stormed the embankment while foe troops shut in from the front lines. Meanwhile, reports expanded across the battleground about the appearance of the worried Ignis Fatuus user. Dread swiftly reached the soldiers. Amid the chaos, Walm understood too late that the fires had previously engulfed close by troops and smashed the ranks. Severe burns blanketed Walm's body as innumerable troops perished throughout him. Survivors stayed traumatized following witnessing the devastation caused by the assault. Amid the urgent meeting, the leaders cautioned all that Ignis Fatuus sorcery could not be stopped through normal military tactics. As the report kept, memories of the battleground came back to the survivors. Scorched corpses blanketed the wrecked land while the enigmatic assault left dread amid the surviving soldiers. Within the command tent, commanders debated whether immense force or elite knights should confront the foe responsible for ruining the bastion. The general ignored reckless suggestions and focused on finding a proper way to lure the deadly fighter into a controlled combat. Johanna moved forward and asked for approval to manage the task jointly with her unit. Following receiving the order to slay the Ignis Fatuus user, Walm silently unsealed his gaze and paid attention without emotion. Rainwater soaked the wooden stronghold while weary troops rested carelessly following the savage combat ceased. Traveling through the sleeping men, Walm quietly neared one fighter lying close to the rampart and seized him without caution. Alarm instantly expanded across the room as multiple troops woke up puzzled and attempted resisting Walm's sudden assault. Regardless of the struggle, he steadily overpowered them one following another. Seconds afterward, painful cries rang through the stronghold while frightened troops understood the bloodshed within the encampment had previously begun. Corpses blanketed the wooden stronghold following Walm's fierce attack amid the night. Wounded troops stayed trapped under the fallen men and fractured furniture. Meanwhile, Walm steadily drank water alongside the bodies, while the known scent of gore and demise expanded through the chilly air. Shortly following, he came back to rest without doubt. The following morning, leaders assembled the remaining troops and commanded them to ready for another savage combat. A platoon leader clarified that foe soldiers would assault from the trenches once more, so Walm's Ignis Fatuus sorcery would be employed to destroy them at once. Prior to the mission started, unit members split their responsibilities and reminded each other to conserve power for the approaching clash. The unit hurried forward through the stronghold while their commanders encouraged all to crush the Christ troops amid the counterstrike. From overhead the ramparts, foe combatants abruptly spotted motion as Hyzerk troops rapidly shut the distance. Bolts and blades hit across the battleground while frightened guards fought to react against the fierce attack. Multiple troops dropped prior to they could organize themselves. The assault kept without pause as additional foe soldiers fell under the unceasing strain from the moving Hyzerk troops. Meanwhile, Burrito provided sustain from a deadly location close to the rampart. Though skilled with a bow, her exposed location worried the troops' combat alongside her. Burrito unleashed an ice assault from the stronghold rampart and smashed the foe attack prior to close. By troops could be harmed. Afterward, Walm spotted the foe troops had altered their tactics following innumerable battles between assault and defensive repeated across the battleground. A settlement boy directed Walm deep into the woods following noticing his concern about the worsening famine throughout their home. While moving jointly, the child clarified that the fields could no longer provide enough provisions for all remaining close. Shortly following, both of them found unknown plants rising thickly between the trees and halted to investigate the zone cautiously. Excitement expanded across the boy's face following. They found big amounts of berries concealed throughout the woods. Walm silently cautioned him not to reveal the site yet. As they assembled provisions, Walm spotted birds flying towards another side of the woods and understood still additional supplies might exist close. The youthful boy worried about Walm and wondered why he always acted older than all throughout him regardless of being the youngest. Following hearing the concern, Walm silently apologized while the child attempted cheering him up with playful behavior. Abruptly, remote memories returned within Walm's thoughts as he remembered moving alone through a modern city prior to his reincarnation. Fragments of his former life as Takakura Reizu came back while he worked endlessly under strict orders and bore continuous regret. The memories eventually ceased with the image of his weary body fell on the earth, reminding Walm how his previous life had truly ceased. Walm embraced that Takakura Reizu no longer existed and silently faced the memories of his former life prior to all things disappeared. Shortly following, painful memories of demise came back as his body crashed into the wrecked battleground under the chilly night sky. Nailing to breathe, Walm gradually recovered consciousness amid the rubble and understood one of his gaze could no longer see. Following inspecting the harm, he recognized the blast and blazing sorcery had permanently shattered part of his face amid the combat. Encircled by innumerable bodies across the ravaged battleground, Walm quietly witnessed the awful price left behind. Following the combat ceased, Walm wandered through the wrecked battleground and found that Hyzerk troops had assembled innumerable bodies into an enormous pile. Alarm overwhelmed him following identifying the dead corpses of his companions, buried amid the rubble and blood-stained earth. Unable to embrace the loss, Walm remained quietly under the dim sky while grief gradually engulfed his reflections. Scattered arms and fractured equipment blanketed the battleground, showing how violently the whole division had been shattered amid the combat. The understanding eventually hit Walm as he recalled Nor, Burrito, and the surviving members of the Dewey division were all gone. Memories of fallen companions rang within Walm's thoughts while grief and fury eventually burst out across the wrecked battleground. Following screaming in despair, he fell alone amid the rubble and stayed motionless under the dim sky for hours. Eventually, Walm compelled himself to stand once more regardless of the agony covering his scorched face and weary body. Looking across the shattered stronghold, he understood the battleground had completely altered following the Great Assault reduced the zone into a graveyard. Far away, faint lights and black flags appeared on the remote ramparts, while Walm wondered what purpose stayed for him following remaining the slaughter. Walm found that numerous bodies had their gaze gouged out prior to demise, reminding him of an elderly story instructed by his brother Hayes. As he inspected the corpses further, he understood the victims had suffered savage torture lengthy. Prior to, they were eventually slew. The horrifying scene smashed Walm's reflections, making him to cry while remembering the innumerable residents he had personally slew amid conflict. Amid the madness, he embraced that combat not ever followed cause since demise could arrive at once without mercy or fairness. Standing alone under the dim sky, Walm eventually recognized the ruthless truth of the battleground where troops could merely slay or be slew. Foe troops spotted motion amid the bodies and understood another injured Hyzerk survivor was yet living on the battleground. As they neared cautiously, Walm stayed encircled by corpses while unusual reflections rang repeatedly through his thoughts. Dread and disorder expanded amid the troops while Walm's memories mixed jointly with rage, loyalty, obligation, and revenge from unceasing conflict. Unable to understand his behavior, the foe soldiers assumed he was merely muttering in agony and ready to end him swiftly. The instant they moved nearer, one fighter abruptly froze following sensing a thing deadly from Walm regardless of his weary state. One foe fighter hurried towards Walm, following believing the injured survivor could barely move across the battleground. Abruptly, the man understood too late that Walm was yet fully conscious and ready to clash back. Disregarding his wounds, Walm swung his armament with savage force and drove the foe backward through the rubble. The battleground burst into fierce cries as both troops stormed straight at each other without doubt. Amid the fight, the foe eventually recognized the horrifying madness within Walm following witnessing his battered face and blood-stained gaze at close range. Walm slaughtered the approaching troops and left their corpses scattered across the wrecked battleground. Following the clash ceased, he recalled the elderly story about Ignis Fatuus, guiding forfeited souls through darkness with ghostly fire. Regardless of the deaths surrounding him, Walm steadily resumed traveling forward while unusual reflections kept filling his thoughts. Standing amid blazing bodies and fractured arms, Walm readied his fires once more and resolved to proceed combat across the battleground. Walm strode through the snowy woods while remembering the fighter who disappeared amid yesterday's night watch. Dread gradually grew within him. Gripping his arms tightly, he crossed the battleground and eventually recognized how conflict shattered each survivor without mercy. Following returning to encampment, fatigue defeated Walm and compelled him into restless sleep alongside the scattered supplies. Loud cries abruptly rang beyond the tent. Foe troops attacked the encampment while frightened soldiers hurried in disorder. Sweat blanketed Walm's face as he seized his armament once more. Another savage combat had previously begun prior to sunrise. Leaving no time for rest or dread amid the remaining troops, Walm spotted enormous fires expanding from the 3rd Military Circle towards the surviving camps amid the night assault. Following witnessing the unusual azure fire, dread crossed his face as he understood the Ignis Fatuus user had appeared once more. Standing prior to the blazing battleground, Walm recognized the foe he slew previous somehow survived through an unnatural might. Without wasting another instant, he hurried across the encampment with Makoto following hearing Ayane and Johanane were in danger. Far from the battleground, a woman steadily announced a full offensive against the weary Hyzerk troops intended for tomorrow morning. Commanders of the friendly nations argued over who would lead the assault following the 3 champions defeated the Liguria battalion. Close. Rita paid attention silently, while concern gradually appeared across her face amid the tense military conversation. An elderly servant brought hot tea to Rita, but her notice stayed fixed on the restless mood surrounding the encampment. Abruptly, unusual noises rang throughout the command tent, making disorder and alarm amid the assembled commanders and troops. Multiple leaders suspected foe spies or sorcery assaults, while Rita cautiously studied the situation and waited for further information prior to acting. Messages of an undead assault expanded through the encampment as troops understood the foe came from the shattered third circle. A courier told the leaders that merely one foe appeared, but it was the same target they missed to eliminate previous. Rita instantly identified the deadly fire user and recognized the encampment faced a grave threat once more. Chaos burst within the command zone as sentinels hurried forward while Rita cautiously observed the approaching foe motion. Seconds afterward, fierce fires detonated through the encampment entrance, slaying close by troops and throwing the whole gathering into alarm. Enormous blasts blanketed the battleground with fire while the surviving troops fought to survive the sudden devastation. Following the fires sapped, merely a few survivors stayed standing amid the scorched tents and fallen corpses within the encampment. Without caution, Walm hurried forward and unleashed a fierce assault against the foe troops close to the command zone. Rita cautiously studied the battleground while realizing Walm kept combat regardless of his battered body and limited equipment. Seconds afterward, she moved onto the blazing earth and readied herself to confront Walm straight prior to additional troops perished. Walm released his enhanced might while dim fires blanketed his battered body, making Rita to instantly sense the danger prior to her. Without easing down, he hurried forward and delivered a mighty blow aimed straight at Rita amid the fierce combat. Still with fractured fingers and severe wounds, Walm kept attacking relentlessly while Rita fought to block his immense power. Both combatants exchanged fierce blows across the blazing battleground as smashed debris scattered throughout their intense fight. A sudden collision detonated between them and shattered the earth under Rita, compelling her backward while Walm stayed standing amid the fires. Rita understood Walm was not an undead monster but a living fighter driven by revenge following losing his companions. Understanding his deadly state, she resolved continuing the combat would merely create additional devastation across the battleground. Disregarding her caution, Walm attacked once more with fierce swiftness while both combatants exchanged severe blows in midair. Regardless of his severe wounds and weary body, Walm rejected to fall and kept combat against Rita, without doubt. Their fight expanded across the blazing battleground as Walm unleashed another fierce attack while Rita fought to stop his unceasing assaults prior to additional troops were slew amid the chaos. Within the battered tent, Rita fought to understand how innumerable troops disappeared within seconds amid the savage combat. From a distance, she quietly observed Walm proceed combat, while merely a few survivors stayed living within the blazing encampment. Dread gradually reached Rita as she understood the battleground had completely fallen beyond anyone's command. Prior to the sentinels could react, Walm abruptly appeared prior to Rita while weary troops frantically hurried towards them. Standing over the wrecked earth, Walm gazed straight at Rita and regretted dying to eliminate her amid their previous encounter. Knowing the conflict had merely grown additional disastrous since that night for both sides, Rita stayed frozen following observing Walm depart the shattered battleground while dread and disorder packed her thoughts. Far from the encampment, Walm's battered face showed how greatly the savage conflict had altered him into a thing horrifying. As troops kept combat close, Rita asked whether helping her country had merely created additional pain for all involved. Remembering their beyond deeds, she gradually understood Walm's rage and bloodshed were born from the tragedy both sides caused. Following employing Ignis Fatuus once additional, Walm disappeared from the battleground, leaving the remaining troops to scan through the blazing ruins while Rita quietly observed the aftermath of the slaughter. Following the combat ceased, the remaining commanders aided the injured while discussing Walm's connection to Edinburgh and the shattered encampment. Looking across the ruins, the surviving troops understood merely a handful of residents survived the chaos caused amid the assault. Rita acknowledged they had completely underestimated Walm, whose power and brutality surpassed still the legendary three champions. Though the combat ceased, Rita silently blamed herself for being powerless amid the crucial instant that shattered innumerable existences. Afterward that night, quiet packed the fortress as Rita stayed alone within her room, unable to forget the devastation and dread left behind by Walm's sudden attack on the battleground. Within the stronghold, a leader reflected on the unexpected defeat of the Liguria battalion and the rising threat facing Crest. Though innumerable troops had perished, he embraced that no plan could come back the dead or repair the battleground losses. Studying maps late into the night, the leader scoured for new tactics while considering traps and sacrificial assaults against the foe. Following reviewing the situation cautiously, he resolved to defend the fort longer while employing scorched earth tactics to delay further invasions. Regardless of readying another military strategy, the leader recognized failure would price him his location, compelling him into isolation far from the capital and the conflict he once controlled. Late at night, unusual tremors trembled the stronghold windows and interrupted the leader's military preparations within the room. Concern expanded through the stronghold as troops hurried beyond to investigate the source of the sudden disturbance. From the fortress ramparts, they found enormous fires consuming the battleground, while the color showed Ignis Fatuus had came back once more. Realizing Walm survived the previous combat, the leader reacted with excitement, instead of dread following identifying his deadly foe. Without doubt, he commanded each available fighter to move instantly, believing the approaching combat would decide the fate of the whole front line prior to sunrise. The leader pressured his weary troops relentlessly, believing swiftness alone could decide the outcome of the approaching combat. Fires engulfed the storehouse while troops bore water through the blazing roadway. Alarm expanded as the fire maintained rising. Multiple injured men were pulled away from the collapsing zone. Haze blanketed the route as the heat became tougher to endure. Walm placed a wounded fighter on the earth and inspected him steadily. Gore and ash blanketed his face while the battleground scorched behind him. Another enemy suddenly attacked. Walm reacted first and thrust his sword forward without doubt. Following, the clash ceased. Fatigue displaced his fury. Revenge no longer sensed meaningful within the unceasing conflict. Walm remained prior to the blazing city and understood the combat ceased in failure. None of the foe commanders had been seized. Fractured earth encircled him while haze drifted through the wrecked roadways. His body sapped from gore loss, yet he kept searching for a way to flee the battleground living. Multiple troops hurried throughout the blazing storehouse and scoured for the fire sorcerer responsible for the catastrophe. Dread expanded as the fires kept swallowing close. By structures, Sohn fighter eventually found Walm fell under the haze and ash. His power had nearly disappeared following the lengthy clash. Regardless of his personal wounds, the fighter bore Walm away from the fires and farther into the wrecked city. Walm compelled himself to stay conscious while leaning against the injured fighter supporting him. The two troops crossed the wrecked roadway jointly as fires engulfed the structures behind them. Walm silently reflected on the innumerable times his comrade had guarded him amid the conflict. Haze packed the night sky while sentinels secured the zone throughout the city. The injured fighter resolved to bring Walm towards the sick bay prior to anyone spotted his state. Fatigue clouded Walm's reflections as he followed alongside the patients. The chaos of the combat eventually faded, yet the memory of the slaughter yet stayed within him. Both men disappeared into the distance while quiet gradually displaced the sounds of conflict. The injured fighter eventually brought Walm to the medical encampment beyond the wrecked city. Healers swiftly assembled throughout the wounded men while the sounds of combat gradually faded behind them. Within the encampment, Walm asked for treatment for the fighter who bore him through the fire. A youthful healer called Ayane neared Walm following hearing about his state. Her quiet look differed from with the chaos surrounding the encampment. While inspecting his wounds, the healers found severe wounds across his body. Walm understood the woman treating him was one of the called champions from another realm. Ayane started healing the battered flesh with immense sorcery. Walm quietly observed the unusual might restore his fractured body piece by piece. While resting within the encampment, Walm understood how deadly the foe healers truly were. A dim belief gradually stepped into his thoughts as he weighed the future of the conflict. He recognized the healer hero might become a serious threat to Hyzerk and the Empire. Regardless of those reflections, Walm hesitated following remembering how Ayane rescued his life without expecting anything in comeback. The conflict within him became tougher to dismiss. Following the treatment ceased, power eventually came back to his body. Walm gratefully acknowledged Ayane while checking the state of his restored wounds. Ayane silently smiled following finishing her task. Meanwhile, Walm concealed his rising concerns behind a quiet look. Recovered from his wounds, Walm silently readied to depart the medical encampment prior to anyone found his identity. Multiple high-ranking figures abruptly stepped into from the opposite side of the encampment. Amid them remained Ayane, the healer able of identifying him instantly. Dread and frustration crossed Walm's thoughts once he understood the flee route was no longer safe. Exposure within foe territory would certainly lead to demise. Keeping his head low alongside the tent entrance, he cautiously controlled his breathing while the party gradually neared his location. Sweat streamed over his wounded face. With no other route surviving, Walm resolved to push forward through the stopped exit prior to the foe eventually spotted him, concealed behind the tents. Walm cautiously observed the foe party standing straight along his flee route. One reckless motion would instantly reveal him. The youthful fighter close by spoke confidently about the combat while believing the deadly fire sorcerer was nowhere close to the encampment. Ease expanded amid the party meanwhile. The fair-haired hero blamed herself for the devastation caused amid the assault. Remorse pressed strongly on her as the others tried to quiet her down. Sweat blanketed Walm's face while he quietly shifted nearer alongside them. Each second sensed deadly, yet the continuing conversation maintained notice away from him. Walm eventually slipped beyond the foe champions and kept moving towards freedom beyond the medical encampment. Merely a few steps stayed prior to Walm could flee the encampment unnoticed. Close by, champions debated the wounded fire sorcerer while darkness kept hiding his identity. Abruptly, the fair-haired warrior halted and called out to him straight. Suspicion packed her look following identifying a thing known about his appearance. Without losing composure, Walm steadily clarified that they may have crossed paths amid the previous combat close to the inner battleground. His lie effectively reduced her concerns. The warrior asked the scars covering his battered gaze and face. Walm blamed foe sorcery while hiding the truth behind a relaxed look. Following a short apology for delaying him, the party eventually permitted Walm to proceed onward. He silently strode away prior to anyone found his genuine identity. The encampment exit eventually appeared prior to Walm following his deadly walk through foe territory. Abruptly, alarms rang through the medical encampment following messages of a new ISEKAI'D attack. Troops and champions instantly hurried towards the battleground entrance. Disorder swiftly expanded amid the foe troops once they discovered ISEKAI'D soldiers had previously fractured through the inner fortifications. Alarm displaced their previous assurance. Walm quietly observed the startled reactions throughout him. While the champions fought to understand how the assault happened so swiftly, their focus moved entirely away from him. News shortly showed that ISEKAI'D troops employed concealed tunnels under the blazing city to bypass the front lines and launched their surprise assault. Foe leaders found the concealed tunnel permitted ISEKAI'D soldiers to step into the inner battleground unnoticed. Messages displayed additional troops arriving each minute. Following understanding the danger, the fair-haired warrior resolved to lead the three champions towards the tunnel entrance to stop the incursion. Multiple troops hurried alongside them while the encampment readied for a counterstrike against the moving ISEKAI'D troops. Walm observed the champions depart and understood this was his finest chance to flee safely, yet letting them proceed would endanger numerous allies underground. Obligation defeated doubt as Walm discarded reflections of flee. Quiet packed his thoughts prior to he readied to come back to combat once more. Reflections of abandoning the battleground disappeared following Walm recalled the troops yet combat underground. Frustration engulfed him prior to he eventually turned back towards the foe champions. Without caution, Walm unleashed himself forward and attacked the fair-haired warrior prior to the party could react. Surprise expanded at once through the tight hallway. The sudden blow compelled the champions backward while close by troops froze in disorder. None of them anticipated an assault from within the medical encampment. Walm stopped the flee route and threatened all standing within the passage. Fires burst close. By a strain packed the battleground once more. Recognition eventually crossed the fair-haired warrior's face following witnessing his scars and armament clearly. Walm's concealed identity could no longer stay hidden. Chilly resolve packed Walm's gaze following his identity became exposed within the medical encampment. Standing prior to the frightened troops, Walm seized command of the zone and resolved to employ the healers and injured as hostages. Encircled by foe champions, Walm understood flee was becoming impossible within the blazing medical encampment. A deadly standoff started as Walm threatened the injured and healers to delay the foe push underground. Time became crucial while both sides scoured for enchants within the tight passage. Uncertainty expanded amid the champions following Walm cautioned them he would scorch all close by if compelled further. Disregarding the threat, the fair-haired warrior readied to assault prior to ISEKAI'D troops could secure complete command of the battleground. Walm cautioned the foe champions that most injured troops within the encampment could not survive another outbreak of demon fire. Fury expanded through the passage following the fair-haired warrior denounced his deeds. Walm instantly reminded them that conflict had previously turned all equally ruthless. Prior to the situation stabilized, one hero abruptly shifted to seize Ayane and conclude the standoff by force. Chaos burst within the medical encampment. Walm reacted at once and released demon fire towards the assailant while close by troops panicked at the sudden escalation. The strain momentarily halted following another hero stepped into the passage and found the deadly conflict unfolding amid both sides. Walm focused on the fair-haired warrior following realizing she stayed the greatest threat to ISEKAI'D troops within the battleground. Demon fire rapidly expanded across the passage and compelled the foe champions away from the injured troops close by. Quiet momentarily packed the blazing encampment while Walm observed the fires proceed consuming all things throughout him. Rage and fatigue overwhelmed his reflections as the combat pulled on without conclude. Frustration gradually displaced his surviving control. The standoff abruptly fell following another fierce fight shattered part of the medical encampment. Debris scattered everywhere while both sides readied to proceed combat. A mighty leader abruptly stepped into the wrecked medical encampment, and positioned himself between Wom and the foe champions. His appearance instantly altered the battleground, without doubt. The leader unleashed a devastating assault that hurled Wom across the passage with immense force. Gore scattered as the collision smashed close by debris. Surprise expanded across the champions following witnessing the leader overpower Wom so easily amid the fight. Realizing the sixth circle would shortly fall, the leader commanded the champions to flee instantly while he stayed behind. Though reluctant to withdraw, the fair-haired warrior eventually obeyed the command and withdrew with the others from the blazing battleground. The leader understood Wom survived the previous assault and acknowledged that his foe held deadly concealed skills. Refusing to withdraw, Wom stated he would not ever permit the warrior and three champions to flee the battleground living. A fierce fight burst between both combatants as blades collided repeatedly across the wrecked passage. Wom swiftly recognized the leader held immense power equal to High Cert captains. Amid the exchange, the leader abruptly seized Wom's armament and locked his motions completely. Alarm crossed Wom's face following losing command of the clash. Without doubt, the leader thrust forward with crushing force and hit Wom straight at close range. Wom narrowly dodged the leader's unceasing assaults following realizing his foe not ever forfeited power or concentration amid combat. While defending himself, Wom analyzed the leader's combat style and recognized he faced an experienced fighter far stronger than normal troops. Frightened survivors observed both combatants fight across the wrecked medical encampment as fires kept expanding throughout them. Regardless of the chaos, Wom yet attempted avoiding unnecessary harm to the injured medics who once handled his wounds. A sudden counterstrike eventually permitted Wom to blow back, but the shallow wound missed to stop the leader's push. A injured fighter screamed following getting drew between the fierce assaults exchanged within the wrecked medical encampment. Gore splattered across the passage while close by survivors panicked in dread. Observing the wounded fall throughout him, Wom understood the combat had previously pulled innocent residents into the conflict. Fires and debris kept expanding through the packed shelter. Meanwhile, the leader steadily maintained command of the battleground and maintained his armament aimed straight at Wom, his look not ever altered, regardless of the surrounding chaos. Without doubt, the leader stated eliminating the fire sorcerer additional vital than guarding the injured troops' clothes. By dread expanded amid the surviving survivors following hearing those words. Quiet engulfed the encampment as the leader readied another deadly blow against Wom and cautioned all else to stay quiet. The leader hit Wom straight and thrust him across the wrecked medical encampment with immense force. Gore scattered as close by troops observed in dread. While Wom fought to recover, the leader exposed the frailty behind his deeds and denounced his unstable judgment amid combat. Another savage exchange burst seconds afterward as both combatants unleashed assaults without doubt. The fight trembled the collapsing passage throughout them. Controlling both the battleground and the frightened troops, the leader steadily drove Wom into a grimmer location amid the clash. Regardless of his wounds, Wom kept resisting while the leader denounced his sympathy towards foe existences amid conflict. The leader hit Wom once more and tore through his body with another devastating slash amid the savage confrontation. Gore sprayed across the battleground as Wom staggered backward, yet the leader steadily moved without easing his assault. Amid the fight, the leader asked why Wom dodged employing Ignis Fatuus while continuing to strain him relentlessly. A sudden blow punctured the leader's armored palm, compelling him to realize Wom had secretly readied a counterstrike. Taking advantage of the chance, Wom hurried forward and showed the whole exchange had been a cautiously intended trap. Wom kept attacking regardless of his wounds and compelled the leader into another fierce fight at close range. A severe blow smashed the earth under them, but the leader abruptly understood his foe had disappeared once more. Disorder expanded across the battleground as injured troops unexpectedly encircled the leader from each direction. Unable to swing his blade freely, the leader found Wom had secretly employed the wounded soldiers to restrict his motions. Gore blanketed the battleground while Wom showed that each action and sacrifice had been part of a cautiously readied trap. The leader understood the injured troops and battleground chaos had limited his motions throughout the whole clash. Wom pressed forward, regardless of severe wounds, and exposed how the leader had gradually adapted to those deadly conditions. A sudden assault interrupted the fight as Wom kept targeting the leader prior to he could recover command. Fires burst across the battleground following Wom eventually unleashed his concealed might amid the crucial instant of combat. Fury engulfed Wom as he unleashed his strongest assault yet, determined to destroy the leader once and for all. Wom defended himself with his battered guard while continuing to strain the leader amid the fierce exchange. Johann abruptly stepped into the battleground and interrupted the leader's assault prior to Wom could be overwhelmed. Jointly, they unleashed a coordinated attack and prevented the leader from regaining command of the clash. Fatigue expanded across Wom's face. Yet he stayed determined to stop the leader no matter the price. As the combat intensified once more, Johann bore Walm away following realizing Ain was yet trapped within the blazing zone. Walm tried to depart the battleground silently following remaining the savage clash, but Ain instantly spotted his state and halted him prior to he disappeared into the ruins. Seconds afterward, armed troops encircled Walm following mistaking his stolen armor and suspicious appearance for an faux infiltrator hiding amid the survivors. Rather than resisting, Walm clarified that he disguised himself as a Felius fighter amid the combat to avoid being slew prior to rescue eventually arrived. The newly arrived soldiers swiftly understood Walm was the wounded fighter responsible for helping their troops reclaim the battleground against immense foe strain. Following hearing the sixth circle had fallen, weary troops recovered hope while Walm encouraged all to proceed pushing forward jointly. Following the combat ceased, Walm rested amid the survivors while admitting his powers were completely weary from the intense combat. A short instant of ease appeared on Walm's face as he silently recovered alongside the wrecked battleground. Another fighter neared curiously and spoke with Walm about the legendary Ignis Fatuus might he once employed amid combat.